Before we begin, can I remind members to turn off the mobile phones completely, as they may interfere with the recording equipment. Are the minutes of the meeting of 30th January 2019, they've been circulated? Are they agreed? Agreed. Correspondence. Item 2019-397. It's an email about the International Transport Forum to be held in Leipzig. It's proposed that the Chair plus one member plus one official would attend. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 21939A, B and C. A. That's an email. It's a basic communication I received from the Office of Minister Jim Daly about basically rural taxis proposals. And there's also a letter from Minister Shane Ross regarding a proposal to make available public transport to rural Ireland, RUCSI. And there was also an earlier communication, I'm conscious Deputy Troy brought it before us at the last meeting in relation to, that you had to people coming here as well. So would it be in order that the Minister would be able to attend and the NTA and other parties? We're talking about the 27th of February, if that's possible.
First, please, Chairman.
Okay,
I haven't got the bubble here.
I will check ours.
Thank you.
But I think, sorry, Deputy Troy, yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. No, you're right. A number of weeks ago, I submitted a proposal that we would call in the various stakeholders, the NTA, the various bodies that are representing the taxi industry, companies such as Uber, who are using technology to assist in connecting people who want to travel from one destination to another. The Minister, the relevant officials. I think it's critically important that we would have at least one meeting designated to address how we can, or to discuss how we can address the deficiencies in rural transport currently. I would just urge, Chairman, that we would do it at the earliest opportunity.
The proposal that the clerk has that we'd hold a special meeting on the 27th of February, and if we invite those parties, and we've made the request to the Minister, I appreciate his check his diary, and if we ask Minister Daly and the other parties that have written to us, is that acceptable to the members? Okay, so if we go ahead with that then. Okay, sorry, excuse me, yeah.
Is Minister Daly coming in as a witness, or is he coming in to be a member of the committee?
It's just that he wrote to us, that's all. He's entitled to attend.
Oh yeah, without question.
No, I know you're not challenging.
I'm only asking, is he coming as...
Well, he doesn't know no more than Minister Ross knew today that that was our proposal, that date as such. But I think that it's an important issue. There's no bar on anybody coming in at all. So will we come back to you on that? We'll send out the invitation, see what happens. Sorry.
It's ironic, all these proposals should have been brought before the government, or by the government, before they were brought into legislation that's causing the problem,
Yeah.
Why are we talking about these things now, when they should have been there before us over 12 months ago, when the Minister for Transport was bringing the New Road Traffic Act? It's annoying,
I appreciate your point. I think, though, it is a constructive engagement with everybody who has written to the committee. That's where this debate arises from at this item. So if we go ahead with that, if that's agreed. Correspondence 2019-399AB, email sent by the clerk in relation to correspondence received from Mr Stuart Gilhooly, and B, draft letter to be issued on behalf of the committee to Mr Gilhooly, and further correspondence from John Paul Brown regarding the same correspondence which has now issued. That's just to inform you that letter has been issued now. So we now turn to our engagement with Minister Ross to discuss matters relating to Brexit. And there are two parts to our meeting today. Firstly, consideration of the heads of the miscellaneous provisions withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the EU on the 29th of March 2019 bill, insofar as those heads of the bill relate to transport, tourism and sport. And the second part will focus on preparations for and the impact of Brexit on the transport sector in Ireland, particularly in the event of a no scenario. So if it's in order, once we finish with the heads of the bill, we'll take a short break and then move into the second part. Is that okay? And just so the process, that the way we deal here is that we take all members of the committee first, and after that any other members who may come in are absolutely welcome to make any contribution. That's in full of a query I received there. Sorry.
Just a suggestion. Could we take the heads of bill and the briefing note and then the Minister's statement so that everyone then can ask all of their questions rather than dividing it up? And
well, there's two. I have no problem with that. I have no issue. But I thought the clerk suggested to me, and in fairness, I think I'm entirely in your hands. So you said it'd just be one session.
One session, and right. If we all two together, and then
and if you need a break during that, we take it. Okay, all right. So that's fine. In this regard, I would like to make sure there have been some changes. I think in the attendances. Somebody said there was earlier. Yeah. Anyway, in this regard, I'd like to welcome Minister Ross and his officials, Miss Anya Stapleton, Miss Maeve McLaughlin, Miss Anne Cody, Miss Nicola O'Dwyer, Eddie Burke, Martin Diskin, Liam Keogh, and David Kitten. If there's any change in that, apologies. That's good. Okay. So the privilege piece I have to read before we commence, and for the purpose of officials attending, I will, in accordance with procedures, I am required to read the following. By virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charge against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I now invite Minister Ross to make his opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I'm here in response to the invitation by the committee to assist in the consideration of the general scheme for parts 9 and 10 of the miscellaneous provisions bill on the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the EU. The general scheme was approved by government for publication and has been submitted to the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel in the Office of the Attorney-General for formal drafting. As you know, this bill is commonly known as the Brexit Omnibus Bill. Before proceeding to consider the draft general scheme here today, it's important to recall some of the core principles set out in the Protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is an integral part of the withdrawal agreement. As we all know, the Protocol is aimed to protect the Good Friday Agreement and the important gains of the peace process, including by underpinning continuing North-South cooperation, by guaranteeing that there will be no hard border on the island of Ireland, and by protecting the all-island economy. All of this provides a critical backdrop to the discussion we will have here today about the rail and bus parts of the Brexit Omnibus Bill. These rail and bus parts form part of our contingency planning arrangements. We're all aware of the strategic importance of keeping channels open and maintaining ease in flows and linkages between people, communities and businesses across the border. Public transport provision is an important component here, especially when we recall the symbolism of the enterprise, a well-used rail service linking Dublin and Belfast on a daily basis. Bus services are also key in linking communities. Parts 9 and 10 of the Omnibus Bill were developed to help ensure the continuation of the enterprise and of cross-border bus services under future scenarios. I'm grateful for the support these parts have received thus far. I trust that we continue to work together to advance the necessary legislation. These parts set out the changes proposed in primary legislation to cover the future continuation of rail and bus services between Ireland and the UK in the event of a no-deal Brexit. I think the committee will agree that the regulatory framework applying and the provision of rail and bus services operating in this country are of the highest standard. This will not change. However, post-Brexit, the UK has changed status from member state to third country, will mean that rail and bus services between Ireland and the UK will need to be managed under slightly different legislative arrangements. You see, in the event of no-deal Brexit, there is a need to consider the appropriate legislative basis to allow for rail and bus services between Ireland and the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, given the new context where the UK is no longer a member state of the EU. As you are all now aware, we need to make a small number of changes to legislation to facilitate the running of public transport services in and out of a third country. These proposed challenges will provide for operation of cross-border rail services, principally the enterprise service on the Dublin-Belfast line, and the operation of bus and coach services between Ireland and the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. My department has had engagement with stakeholders, including public transport operators, the Commissioner for Railway Regulation and the National Transport Authority, as well as with the European Commission. These discussions have served to underline the importance of consistently complying with EU law while exploring and searching for pragmatic solutions to address new scenarios. Some issues are being considered at an operational level, and there may be practical answers emerging at different levels. While it's clear to me that providing necessary underpinning legislation for new scenarios is an important step, it has also become obvious that other stakeholders have roles to play in progressing this critical agenda. My department will continue its engagement and oversight to help ensure that any necessary contingency plans are agreed and advanced. I'd now like to speak for a few minutes on each of these parts. On bus and coach, we start with bus and coach services. Part 10 addresses bus and coach services. A significant number of cross-border bus and coach services support the needs of businesses and the surrounding communities. These will rely on provision being made for the future continuation of cross-border services once the UK leaves the European Union. I'm advised that on a daily basis, Monday to Friday, there are over 300 cross-border bus journeys authorised by the National Transport Authority, or the NTA. These services range from daily regular services to local link services. They are operated by both private and public companies. This figure does not take into account the occasional journeys which capture the once-off community-related bus and coach services. These would include instances like a GAA or rugby club near Clones, for example, which brings a team to participate in the Saturday morning blitz taking place across the border. In total, the number of cross-border commercial passenger journeys in 2017 is estimated at just under 2 million. I think you'll agree that a significant number of people are relying on us to ensure continuity of service and to continue to take steps to ensure the highest safety and quality of service standards are maintained. For buses and coach services, legislative changes will be needed so as to allow for their future continuation between Ireland and the UK as a third country. After Brexit, Ireland will be allowed under EU law to enter into a bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom for bus and coach services, so long as no existing bus agreement exists between the UK and the EU. It's anticipated that Ireland would need such a bilateral to allow public passenger bus services to cross the border. The heads in Part 10 will lay out the rules so that a competent authority may regulate services to and from a third country. Those rules would then be considered as a backdrop once Ireland begins formal negotiations on a bus bilateral with the UK. As you know, the NTA is currently Ireland's competent authority for regulating bus services with other member states. These heads will make the NTA the competent authority to similarly regulate bus services between Ireland and third countries. Similar to rail, the intention of this part is to maintain the strong regulatory regime that already exists for the purposes of bus and coach services between Ireland and the United Kingdom. The heads in Part 10 propose amendments to the Public Transport Regulation Act 2009. Engagement with the Office of the Parliamentary Council regarding the bus heads has commenced. It may well be that further amendments will be identified as needed. For example, it's possible that there will also be a need to reference the Dublin Transport Authority Act of 2008 to expand the statutory functions of the NTA. And now move to the rail heads. In relation to rail, the heads proposed would provide in statute that a bilateral or cross-border rail agreement may be entered into so as to facilitate continuity of the daily enterprise rail services running from Ireland into a state that is no longer an EU member state. Article 14 of EU Directive 34 of 2012 sets down provisions on the making of a cross-border rail agreement between an EU member state and a third country. The railheads in the general scheme provide powers for the Minister to make a bilateral agreement and also provide for the Minister to make regulations. I wish to take the opportunity to highlight for committee members today that discussions between the Department and the Parliamentary Council regarding these provisions are ongoing. When engagement with the OPC regarding formal drafting of these rail provisions commenced, some matters came to light which required further consideration and legal advice. Analysis is ongoing at present with a view to establishing whether these rail provisions are best made in the form of primary legislation or whether secondary legislation might be more appropriate. Given the high priority attached to all Brexit-related legislation, we are deeply engaged so as to determine this matter. Pending that, work is also taking place on the development of draft secondary legislation to address the contingency that a statutory instrument may also be required to supplement the provisions in the current railheads. Our main goal here is to ensure that an appropriate safety regulatory regime can apply in the case of rail services into the north post-Brexit. I'm committed to maintaining the same level of safety as currently applies to the now EU-regulated cross-border rail services from Dublin to Belfast. As I said earlier, it is evident that the Enterprise Rail Line is recognised as a symbolic and strategic cross-border corridor, a key link between North and South. Legislation is one of the important building blocks as we aim to ensure that this important rail service continues. However, I can assure the Committee that a range of measures are under consideration in the context of wider contingency plans. The intention of these parts in the Omnibus Bill is to provide robust primary legislation which, in the event of a disorderly exit, will help ensure the future continuation of rail and bus services between Ireland and Northern Ireland, as well as between Ireland and Great Britain. As I have said, given the Brexit timelines, my department is giving clear priority to working closely with the OPC to confirm a shared understanding and to advance the drafting of this general scheme, as well as any other legislative provisions which are deemed to be required, whether primary or secondary. I thank the Chairman for inviting me to make this presentation and look forward to hearing the views of the committee and to responding to any questions you may have.
Okay, Minister, just on the proposal of Deputy Munster, I think the proposal was that we take the heads of the bill and the whole debate is not what I think was at the same time, concurrently. So in other words, we'll deal with, so when a member wishes, they can either raise the heads of the bill or and the other. Okay. So if Minister, if you'd like to, if it's in order then, if you could just, if you wouldn't mind the second part. That's fine. Of the
Go to that, yeah.
Just in relation to how we proceed with this, and we want to be as efficient as possible.
No, absolutely.
We could be kind of skipping backwards and forwards in terms of the heads of the legislation.
Well, I mean, it was my intention to proceed with the head separate to the other debate, but Deputy Munster, in fairness, proposed that we don't do that, and nobody actually, you all agreed with that. But I'm in your hands. Like I think, whatever. There's no restriction on anybody raising any question. There's no time limit on the Minister. If needs be, he'd burn the midnight oil. Deputy Munster, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Maybe we might be able to. Sorry. Did you?
I mean, I don't mind if there's serious objection to it, but there's no time limit or anything, so we can.
There's no time limit. There's no restriction on raising any issue at all. But it's just that I would agree personally, take the heads bill, get them out of the way, and then deal with the other issues. It's probably more helpful and focused the response of the officials as well, specifically on the brief that they have. But like, there's no problem. So can I get a consensus? We take the heads of the bill, then you want to post that?
It's just if we were to go through the heads of the bill and say something is raised on, say, head number 2 or something, and we have to wait a half an hour to come back to that. That doesn't seem to be a terribly efficient way. I get the point in relation that there's an overarching issue as well. Sure. How do we accommodate that and yet be efficient in how we get through this?
Of course. Well, Deputy Munster, to reply to that point.
Well, I've said what I've said, but I mean, if there's objection, it's not a big issue.
Do you want to make a proposal then? A counter proposal? We'll just deal with it very quickly.
Whenever we're dealing with the heads of the bill, whether it's at the second part or the first part, that we deal with it on a just we go through it.
You go through the heads of the bill first.
The bill is largely a technical bill,
It is,
which
yeah.
is not going to take a huge amount of time to deal with. So maybe we'll just deal with it, get it out of the way, and
That's-
move on with the
Yeah,
next
I'd
one.
be happy with that. Is that agreed? Okay, all right. So, on Chofto Mahoney, sorry, on Chandler O'Mahon.
Okay, just again, I'll be very quick. I just in the formal questions thank you, Minister, for your presentation on the rail and bus issues. I suppose the question is what's going to be on the ground, what's going to be the practical experience of people. It seems to suggest that there can be a bilateral agreement if there's a no deal on the 29th. But I mean, there's going to be a period there. It's not going to be how long is a bilateral agreement going to? How long will it take to get a bilateral agreement, and what will be the experience of passengers going by on the Enterprise or on a bus or coach trip between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, or the other way, on the 30th of March? That's the question that I'd like to see answers, and the practical implications for the people, because at the end of the day it's the general public that will have to, and the outcome of what happens between now and the 29th is going to have to deal with it. So I'll just that question straight away.
Fine, and Chuck to try.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Just a number of brief questions in relation to this. From the point of view of the Department of Transport, is this the only amendments or changes to the Brexit Omnibus Bill that's going to be needed to be made under the responsibility of your department, Minister? This is my understanding, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, is very much technical. It's very much about the regulatory environment in terms of how the rail and bus operate, going now from being all part of the one union to a situation where the Northern Ireland, the UK, will be a third country status. Can I ask, Minister, while you outline here the regulatory changes that are required and will be made, are we any wiser in terms of people who are going to be travelling and goods that are travelling over the border, in terms of will there be, what checks will be put in place for one, people, and two, for goods?
Deputy, wish to ask a question at this stage? Okay, Deputy Munster.
Yeah, just in relation to the firstly, just I'd had seen somewhere, Minister, that you had said you had met with your Secretary of State for Transport in Britain some months back, and that was the last time that was the impression I got, was that was the last time you'd met him, and that was at his request. Just to say that first, but just in relation to, say, the bus and coach services, it said Ireland be allowed under EU law to enter into a bilateral agreement. That bilateral agreement requires bilateral talks, and I'm just wondering what formal bilateral talks have taken place that you've had so far in relation to the agreement, and what stage are we at in finalising the bilateral agreement? And when exactly could we expect that to be in place? But basically, have they taken place?
Can I ask, sorry, Chuck to Catherine Murphy.
Some of them are similar enough. Who are the bilateral agreements taking place between? And where you say in your opening statement that you'll move towards Ireland begins formal negotiations on the bus bilateral with the UK. So that suggests that there have been informal negotiations. So is it with, when you talk about the UK, are you talking about, and we're acutely aware that the institutions are not in place in Northern Ireland, has that been an issue? And has that meant that the informal, and I presume there were informal bilaterals, were with the British government ministers as opposed to you might just Northern Ireland? I just don't see how that will work. And has that been thought about in terms of the transition period, assuming that there will be a withdrawal agreement? You talk about stakeholders in your opening statement, and it relates to this in terms of trying to drill down and anticipate the issues. Were stakeholders that were consulted exclusively Republic of Ireland, or were there Northern Ireland stakeholders consulted, and how would that happen? And just to add to the point that Deputy Troy made about goods and whether or not this covers the totality of what the Department of Transport will be required to cover in this legislation. Is goods under a different department or departments? And are there any transport elements? And I find it very hard to imagine that there weren't or there aren't transport elements. So should we expect further pieces of legislation or an expansion of this piece of legislation? I have to say that it's very difficult to read it and read Northern Ireland and third country. It really just brings it into very sharp focus, just exactly the enormity of it, just when you see it in black and white, just exactly how gigantic this separation is going to be.
Just I want to, well, you're welcome, Minister, but in particular your colleagues, the level of work and responsibility of your department and your colleagues is really, really fundamental in all of this. In actual fact, I might say, compared to some other departments, you carry an awful lot of the burden in helping making this successful, because it's all about movement of people and movement of goods. I'll just say one more thing in relation to that. This is a document by the British government that was issued on the 21st of December last, Partnership Pact preparing for changes at the EU border after a no-deal EU Brexit. Now, I've read this a couple of times, and just to give a sense again of the enormity of the task, on page 26 of that, Northern Ireland businesses importing from Ireland, you know what it says? We, the British government, would recommend that if you trade across the land border, you should consider whether you need advice from the Irish government about the preparations you need to make. That to me shows, hold on a second guys, what are you doing? It's in black and white there, which is not even less than satisfactory. It's not good enough. Just want to make those points, and again it's in a sense of the significant work and contribution that our civil servants and the Department of Transport are making to try and have this as seamless as possible. I think it's important that we weigh in and support each other at this time. One or two questions. Movement of passengers, and I agree with you, we've got to start first of all looking at Northern Ireland and what's the relation to movement of passengers and movement of freight. There's a lot in this 120-page document about freight and how that's going to come about, and border checks and customs duty and tariffs and so on. And it's difficult, and it's a little bit back to the point Deputy Murphy and Deputy Troy was making. We need to see this in terms of the overall picture. And maybe when coming back and feeding back the information to us, if you give us a sense of how this fits into the overall picture, would be very, very helpful, I think, from our perspective. Because some of the questions overlap, and I can understand why Deputy Munster was asking, had a request earlier on, and it may well be, this may be part of the concerns she had. Back to what's this situation? I'm thinking about a passenger, any of us or somebody from Northern Ireland going up north or coming down south. What's your view? Will they require a passport at a border? Will there be... I can see how buses and trains can move, but I'm looking at the people on those buses and trains. Have you Have you got a sense on what the requirements will be, or will it just be a normal ID? Have you discussed that with any other parties, any other third parties in Northern Ireland or in the UK? I'm very interested to get your views, but it's probably not for just now. It's a bigger picture on the next step, the bilateral agreement with the UK, and what stage are you at generally in relation to that? And I understand that there are significant EU requirements, and the EU do facilitate bilateral agreements, and I understand that we've got to kind of come within those terms and conditions as well. So, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Sure. Just one small question to you, Minister, and I welcome the questions that have been asked here. I presume that the issue in the regulation of safety management systems, particularly in all of that, that there will be uniformity right across Europe and the UK, and indeed other countries as well, outside of the EU, that would be transporting, by vehicles, whether it be buses or rail or whatever, into Europe. I presume there's a convergence of those regulations. Is there an overarching regulatory body that manages all that? If that's a reasonable question. That's it. There isn't, is it? It's the NTA. So you're happy to, whatever way you wish to answer, Minister, there's no...
Okay, sure. Thank you. Has everybody finished? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I'll try and answer these in order. Deputy Mahoney, thank you. The objective of this, obviously, the two objectives of this as it stands at the moment. One is that the enterprise and that rail and buses should have the minimum, absolute minimum amount of disruption. Right? And any talks that are going on have that particular objective in mind. And I'm pretty confident that with the talks that are going on between ourselves, that's my department, the British government and Northern Ireland Rail, that we will establish a pretty seamless transition in a no-deal Brexit situation. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that we'll be able to, on the rail, where we will be able to introduce a bilateral at an early stage. There's enough evidence to suggest that the preliminary talks, which are not bilateral talks at the moment, but preliminary and exploratory talks we're going on at the moment, will reach enough agreement, certainly between the companies involved, in which I'm talking about Ian Aaron and Northern Ireland Rail, so that we will have trains running on the same basis until we can introduce a bilateral, which is allowed by the EU and is conceded by the EU at a very early stage after the 29th of March. It's a very fair question, but I don't think you're going to have, passengers being turfed out of the border or anything like that. That's not going to happen. We're going to have a situation whereby it's going to be seamless because of an agreement and a contract between the companies, and because the governments are obviously going to be in favour of that as well. So I think we'll have minimum disruption because of the contract arrangements. I think the practical experiences in both cases will be similar to what they are at the moment. But this is why we're now actually, as a matter of urgency, looking at the rail, because the enterprise is obviously an absolutely key symbolic link between North and South.
Chair, could I just say, what you're really saying is that they're called preliminary talks now because they cannot be bilateral, official, formal talks with laughter. So that there'll be no transition. I don't mean talking about transition and Brexit. I'm talking about transition for passengers. There'll be no day or two or week that there'll be that the new arrangements won't come into place, or it'll be just a matter of continue as you are.
They're called informal discussions, and that's what they are at the moment, because obviously a bilateral can't be introduced in advance of that. But the informal discussions we expect to be conclusive enough to be able to make sure that passengers are not unduly disrupted.
So this will click in on the 30th of March in the no deal scenario?
Well, I think we'll have a situation arranged by the 30th of March whereby the passengers are accommodated. The discussions are still going on, but we're very confident that that will be all right.
And there'll be nothing noticed on the ground, or no one checked, or people on the trains or anything?
Well, I think the government's made it absolutely clear that we've absolutely no intention of any controls on the border at all.
Have the EU signed off on this memorandum?
The EU is fully aware and supportive of what's going on the rail. Yeah.
You make it sound as if a no-deal Brexit, there's going to be no problem.
Is what?
You make it sound as if a no-deal Brexit, that there's going to be no problem post.
There's going to be a huge amount of problems
Well,
in a no-deal Brexit. What we're doing, Deputy, is trying to overcome them, and that's what we're going to do.
Any other questions you wish to answer there, Minister?
Yeah, sure. Deputy Troy asked if this was the only bill. Well, it's part of an omnibus bill. The bills that we have here are part of an omnibus bill. I'm not ruling out the possibility of amendments, certainly not. We're talking to the OPC on an ongoing basis. Nothing's written in stone. I brought a general scheme to the Cabinet on this basis, but it certainly is subject to amendment if we discover that there would be more sensible ways of doing it. But the bones which you have in front of you are the bones of what the deal will be. But we may change it in various places between now and March, when we hope to introduce it. But fundamentally, the principles are all there. And
maybe I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
And I'm just asking. I know, quite aware it's an omnibus bill. Quite aware that it stretches over a number of departments. My direct question is this the only element that is your responsibility, or will you be coming back to us with another section of the omnibus bill in relation to any other elements of transport?
I don't anticipate doing that, no. Now, Deputy Munster. Yeah, I think the question is when I last met Chris Grayling, wasn't it, the opposite number? Sorry, did you goods travelling checks? We've absolutely no intention of putting any border checks on. We made that absolutely and totally clear. Sorry, I thought I'd answer that. No, it's not going to happen.
No passports.
No passports. No, sorry, no passports.
You just said in your opening address in relation under the heading changes to legislation. You said that some issues are being considered at an operational level, and there may be practical answers emerging at different levels. Can you give us a flavour in terms of what issues are being considered at operational level, and what practical answers are emerging now? Because at the moment we're pretty much in the dark in terms of how you're going to overcome the challenges of a hard deal Brexit.
The issue of the Irish Rail and Northern Irish Railways already have a very close contractual relationship, which will be the foundation for the future strong relationship which will continue after Brexit. In other words, the operational level will be decided between them. They will improve, hopefully, and change their contractual relationship accordingly. But we're talking about detail and the way it operates itself, which I leave up to the operators, because all the variables, as you know, are not under my control. We're talking about things like ticketing and issues of that sort, which I wouldn't be involved in. I'm confident, though, that
we're not talking about tickets.
Well, we're talking about operational level. They get after.
We're not talking about where they're getting the tickets, or
we're talking about
crossing a border, which after a hard Brexit, you're going into a third country, and as part of your opening address, you talk about issues are being considered at operational levels, and there may be practical answers emerging. And I'm just asking, have you a flavour of the issues that are being considered? And I know Irish Rail and Northern Enterprise are well able to sell tickets to their passengers that are going. That's not what we're asking here for at all today, Minister.
Issues at operational level are things which they will decide between them. Obviously, logistical issues like that, but they're not issues in which I would get myself involved.
But they can't decide on the border issue.
The border is not going to become an issue here.
I think the point of common primarily, I think, is not the key to all of this. Certainly the rail and the bus transport should be you know, it should be seamless, really.
Yeah, that's the objective. I don't think Deputy Troy understands what I'm saying. That's the objective. It should be absolutely seamless. But the issue of operational matters will be left to them. Sorry, the Deputy Munster. I was getting on to you. The meeting with my counterpart in the UK. I think I last met him in November, December. I'll just checking the date. I've met my UK counterpart, the Secretary of State for Transport, Chris Grayling, on Brexit matters on 3 occasions over the past 20 months. I met the Secretary of State at my request in London on the 26th of May 2017 to discuss the transport implications of Brexit. I met him again at my request on the margins of Transport Council in Brussels on the 5th of December 2017, and more recently at the Secretary of State's request, I met him in Dublin on the 8th of November 2018. In relation to the most recent meeting, the parameters of the discussion were clearly communicated to the Secretary of State in advance, in particular the need to fully respect the mandate of the EU's chief negotiating for the EU 27, and that the discussion could not stray into the area of negotiations. At that meeting, the 8th of November, the Secretary of State Grayling outlined the key areas of concern for the UK in relation to transport. For my part, I set out the importance of continued transport connectivity between Ireland and the UK, including in relation to ports, aviation, road transport and cross-border rail. I stressed the importance of finalising the withdrawal agreement, highlighted the importance of the UK land bridge as a route to European markets for us, and the need for Irish trade to move efficiently through ports. I stressed that as regards the future EU-UK relationship, Ireland wants to see the closest possible links between the EU and the UK across a wide body of goods. I would also be able to provide you with details of meetings I've had with other ministers, if you want. Transport minister.
It's worrying that the talks, okay, if you're prevented, but are you prevented from having bilateral talks? But are you prevented? Were you saying there that you're prevented from having any formal talks? You said that the talks were all informal.
No, the informal talks are the ones I'm talking about in terms of the rail.
So are you prevented from having formal talks in relation to all of this?
I was, of course, happy and sought meetings with Chris Grayling, and with various other transport ministers, and there was absolutely no question of them being either formal or informal. They were meetings which were reached at either my request or his.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering in relation to the agreements, this meeting is about preparedness.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, we know the EU have brought in legislations there and what have you, but we want to know in relation to you, as regards the stresses that this island will face in relation to Brexit, what work you've done, and that's why I asked about bilateral meetings and how far are we on, given if you didn't have formal talks and we're 7 weeks out, right, if the discussions were informal, that's what you said. We're 7 weeks out from the possibility of so I'm just wondering how far on are we? What was discussed in relation to the actual agreements? What was possible?
I think it should be clear to you from what I've said that I could not and would not negotiate or be in a position to negotiate. That was up to the EU 27. And the EU was negotiating on our behalf. And I was not at any stage negotiating with the British minister. That was not my job. But I was, of course, very prepared to hear what he had to say, his point of view, and I was prepared to express some concerns which we had as well. But the idea that we were negotiating, absolutely out of the question. I did meet with others, which I can give you some details of now, with whom, again, I was not negotiating. but I can give you some details. In November, I met with my French counterpart, Minister Bourne, and at the same time, that was just very close to the date that I met Chris Grayling. In May, I met Professor Peter Ballas, the EU coordinator for the North Sea Mediterranean 10T corridor, and Brian Simpson, the EU coordinator for the Motorways of the Sea programme. Brexit was a key point on the agenda. Both coordinators were cognizant of the unique challenges facing Ireland as a result of the UK's decision to leave the European Union. In October 2017, I met the EU Trans Commissioner Violetta Bulc, and these are not excuses. I met lots of other people. I met them on many other occasions as well, but these weren't necessarily all formal meetings. You'd meet them when you're out there at the Transport Council meetings and discuss relevant matters. I met her on a visit to Ireland, and I raised with her Ireland's concerns in relation to the implications of Brexit on transport and connectivity. I previously had met Commissioner Bulc at the Transport Council in Luxembourg in June 2017. In September, I held a conference call with Ken Skates, the Welsh Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Infrastructure, on Brexit-related matters. In June 2017, I met the Austrian Minister for Transport, Innovation and Technology in relation to Brexit and road safety. I also met with members of the External Affairs Committee of the National Assembly for Wales on matters primarily relating to Brexit. In May 2017, I met the Swedish Minister for Infrastructure, Anna Johansson, on road safety and Brexit matters. I also met the Secretary of State, UK Secretary of State for Transport. But I can keep going on. Sorry, I won't.
Minister.
No, I won't go on. But what I'm trying to say is there was a very, very intensive and very regular meetings on this issue with key people who were there.
The Irish Independent.
Yeah.
So thanks to the front page of the Irish Independent that ran the story where you hadn't been meeting anybody, and then all of a sudden you decided whistle-top trip around, meet your counterparts.
All right, so you're ever the humorist, Deputy Troy. Okay.
Minister, I suppose what I'm looking to find out is what prep work is it that you've done in relation to the bilateral agreement? You had said in your statement that you're doing prep work, so I want to know what your plan is. OK, there's been a series of formal meetings, but we've heard nothing because it's about preparedness, as I said, for the stresses that may be inflicted on this island. So what prep work have you done? And you had said also that in your statement that under EU law you can talk about these issues. So whilst informal talks are all right, the onus is on you too to set about your plan.
You must say, I would have thought you'd see the results of a lot of the work that we've done already, and you might acknowledge it. No, because this is not a time for kind of scoring points. What we're trying to do,
exactly.
What we're trying to do is
precisely. It's very, very serious, and I'm extremely worried that.
Yeah.
In fairness, you've asked your question. The Minister is answering it.
And in the national interest, I think you should acknowledge the extraordinarily formidable problems which we have encountered in aviation, in roads, in sea, and in other areas, and the fact that so many of those have already been overcome to a large extent. We were facing, and we are still facing, a very, very critical date on the 29th of March. We were facing some very serious challenges on aviation. Those, as you know now, have been they haven't been resolved, but they've certainly are less threatening than they were. And I'll go into those later when we get to the second part. We had some very, very serious challenges on road haulage as well. Those challenges have been again not resolved, but certainly we have escaped the worst case scenario, and that is also the case. I hope in terms of land bridge and other areas, but I'm not saying that everything is conquered at all. What I'm saying is that we've done a huge amount of work. My department's done a huge amount of work, and I'm proud of the results that we've got so far. The worst case scenario that we faced a few months ago is greatly improved. And that's not done by sitting back and doing absolutely nothing, you know. That's actually done by a lot of work and a lot of talking to a lot of people. And it's done by talking to the stakeholders and cooperating with the EU Commissioner and impressing upon them, particularly in the cases of aviation and the hauliers, where we did face a very, very difficult scenario, that it was in Ireland's absolute vital interest that we had interim arrangements. Those have been achieved.
Okay, Minister, thanks. And just in relation to, there was the briefing document, you know, that it said that the European Commission had published a number of legislative measures ensuring baseport transport connectivity in a no-deal scenario, right? And that's good, that's great. And that's, Europe has this done, and that it's good that they have it done. But what it appears to me that you've just taken the EU law and transposed it into Irish law, and that's good too. But I'm still not getting, and I'm asking you, I'm not making political points, I'm asking you as a border TD minister, someone who comes from a border area, and I'm asking what work you've done, what prep work other than informal meetings. And I've a rake of questions to come on every aspect of it. So I'm just curious, you know, great you had informal meetings, great that EU legislation, you've transposed it into Irish law. But this is a meeting, as I said, about preparedness. And thus far, I've seen nothing that would give me comfort or my constituents comfort as to what you've actually done in relation to flagging up, formulating the basis of an agreement that that will be put into a bilateral agreement, but having those discussions other than on an informal basis. And that's what
if it's helpful,
you know, in terms of the stresses.
What the Minister said, if I've heard him correctly, is that the formal negotiations done by the EU, you know, as they're doing the negotiations.
Oh yeah, no, and they've transposed into Irish law, I know that.
I just want to be fair to everybody. And I think that any meetings he's talking about, he means that they're not formal EU negotiating positions. But obviously, he is working and endeavouring to make sure the very thing that we all want is that there's joined up transport between the UK and us in relation to the heads of these bills and in relation to Brexit generally. I think that's a fair comment. Now, I know you've other questions. I just want to make the Minister aware that we're also waiting, Deputy Murphy and Senator O'Cady, and obviously if Deputy Coppinger wishes to ask questions after that.
Can I just respond to that? I mean, Deputy Munster, I'm a bit staggered, not for the first time, by what you say.
No, and likewise, Minister.
Well, maybe you haven't read your brief. Not for the first time either.
It's very worrying.
Not for the first time either. Because here we have in front of you, here you have in front of you pieces of a general scheme for legislation. Do you not think that takes prep work?
Well, when I go
is
into
prep
the
work.
detail
That is real preparation.
Can
I finish,
right.
Deputy Munster? I'll let you have a good run. Did you not think that this was taken to the Cabinet? Do you not think this preparation, this work? This is specifically addressing the issue of the border which you're so concerned about. And if you read that, and if you read the preparation that went into it, and I doubt whether you have done, but if you read that, you'll understand full well that there's a huge amount of preparatory work gone into this, the general scheme.
Minister,
that's what that's about.
Yeah, I have a series of questions for you, and as the meeting, you know, as we go through the different aspects of it, it'll unfurl just exactly what level of work, what plan you have will unfurl before the meeting. So we'll go into the details later on, as I said, and we'll just see exactly what you've done and what you haven't done. And so far, it's quite scary.
I think Deputy Murphy's questions and Senator O'Cady is still waiting answers to their questions.
Sorry. Okay. Get to them then. Deputy Murphy, it would be better if the Assembly was there. Of course it would. It would always be better if the Assembly was there. But I think we found that we've been able to negotiate these particularly difficult paths. And I'm not talking about negotiations with them, but I'm talking about negotiate this particularly difficult path in the absence of the Assembly. And we've been able to produce some very complex legislation in the absence of the Assembly as well. There have been preliminary talks, as we said, between the Irish Government and between my department and representatives in Northern Ireland, and we've got this result as a result of that. I don't see any major. I think I replied this to Deputy Troy as well. Legislation coming through, but it doesn't mean that we won't amend this legislation if it's absolutely necessary.
Okay,
Minister, I think you've answered the questions that I've asked in a general sense, like, for example, passports, movement of passengers, and you're going to deal later on in relation to freight and other areas, and the first area, and also in relation to the UK. Down the road, obviously aviation would be something I'm very interested in, and look forward to your comments on that. Overall, I just want to make one comment. Again, back to what I said in the beginning. I, for one person, very much appreciate all you, and in particular your department, are doing. It's not easy. It's a tough job. And as I read out from that document from the British government, it's just been landed on our lap. The other thing also you said very early, Minister, you said the meetings you've had with your British counterpart and others, you said they were neither formal nor informal. They were just meetings. It was not described that this is formal, informal, on record, off record. And I think that's important to state, because we spent over a half an hour using formal, informal, and at least I counted 5 occasions and I stopped counting. And to be honest with you, time is important to me, so it is. So I'm keen that we have productivity.
Formal meetings are important 7 weeks out, actually.
A couple of other ones there. I mean, I asked about stakeholders in Northern Ireland. I mean, it's one thing having and it's essential that we do have a legislative framework, but you know, the heads of those bills this bill didn't come from nowhere. It obviously came from teasing out some practical issues and looking at the piece of legislation or the document that the European Commission would have published. But there's obviously practical issues, some of them that won't need legislation but do need consideration. You talked about talking to stakeholders. I asked whether or not the stakeholders were exclusively in the Republic, or whether or not there were some stakeholders in Northern Ireland consulted, or even would that have been viable. And I fully understand that it's the 27 that are negotiating, and where there's a great value in that, in terms of the unity of the European Union. There is a negative in it in terms of us having to postpone discussions on things that are the practical things that we need to deal with to function in whatever way we end up, whether there's a deal or whether there's a crash out. We still have to deal with the fallout from that, and all we're trying to get. And there's some things in your opening statement that are saying something, but really not. You nearly need to decode them. The point that Deputy Troy made, and he was teasing out, I can't see it in this, but there may well be practical things. It's there somewhere, but it's to get some sort of an understanding of, you know, why that was even in your opening statement. It's kind of written a little bit in code, the opening statement, parts of it. We're trying to read through that and kind of get an understanding of how this will practically happen, what preparation has gone on within the limited scope that's available to you by virtue of the fact that you can't have formal negotiations in advance. You can't do bilaterals, and at the same time you have to have agreements. We're trying to get our heads around what preparation has gone on, who has been talked to, and what stakeholders, for example, have been consulted, and what is it practically going to look like on the ground. Now, you've answered some of that in that you don't expect that this is going to be relatively seamless, in that people will be able to get on the train, buy a ticket in Belfast and come to Dublin, vice versa. The thing about it is that how does that fit with a crash out, in terms of there being the European frontier And will that cause us problems later on? It may not be immediately a problem, but could it cause us a problem? And is this legislation going to be sufficient to cover some of those areas, or will there be more legislation needed?
Just on that point, just a point just struck me. I know it's for private motorists, they'll be required a green card, we're told, if they're travelling north of the border in the UK. And what sort of will there be criteria applying to, say, to bus companies as well, or how will that, is that part of the issues, the practicalities? And if there is a crash out and a no deal, you know, what will actually happen there in terms of people proving, or the requirement to prove their insurance, whether it be by bus or whatever, by car or coach?
Okay.
So.
Let me try and take those in chronological. Okay, Deputy Murphy. Yeah, I mean, by definition, we have to be a bit circumspect about this, and I think you probably understand that. But I'd say that there is ongoing engagement, fairly intensive engagement between the rail operators, Irish Rail and Northern Irish Railways. They've always had a contract with each other, haven't they? And they're still talking on the basis of that contract, and they're looking at maybe a subcontracted solution on a temporary basis to get us over any temporary difficulties. But we are anticipating that an agreement will be reached, and that after the 29th of March there will be a bilateral agreement. This is about keeping the enterprise going and keeping the bus services going, and we will do everything we can to achieve that. And we don't see that we don't see that there are any insuperable obstacles to it. But we do recognise that there are difficulties. But that's why we're talking to the stakeholders. The stakeholders really, I suppose, are the rail operators, Irish Rail and Northern Irish Railways at the moment. But I mean, everybody else is going to be involved under the legislation which we've addressed here, including the NTA as a regulator, and the Minister will make regulations as well. So everybody, you know, and department to department are speaking as well, north and south. Not negotiating. It's most important that we must make that distinction. There is not a negotiation going on, but there is a contract.
Question, Sten, about the green card insurance and the one about the overarching safety regulation, regardless of country of origin when the destination is.
Okay, the insurance, yeah. The green card. At present, the UK comes within the ambit of the European Union Motor Insurance Directive, which allows all motor vehicles from any member states to travel within the EU without carrying special documentation to prove that they have insurance. If there is a no-deal Brexit, Irish registered vehicles entering UK territory, including Northern Ireland, will be required to carry a green card, a document which proves that they have motor insurance. Likewise, UK citizens wishing to take their UK registered motor vehicles into Ireland will also require a green card. In preparation for the possibility of a no-deal Brexit, the Motor Insurance Bureau of Ireland and the motor insurance firms in the state have been preparing for the possible issuing of green cards on request from an as-yet unspecified date in March. The MIBI has issued public statements to this effect, and the UK Association of British Insurers has issued similar public information. This is a prudent measure. While no one wants green cards to be required, the insurance industry needs to be prepared for the possibility that they will be.
So on that point, Minister, if there is a crash out, obviously that's it. You must have that card in theory the next day.
Yeah.
Is that the case?
Yeah.
So when you say that it's you have to get it on request, while I agree that people obviously living in West Cork might be crossing the border that often, certainly in border counties we will. So I think it would be important that that people living in border counties will be automatically issued with that, I would have thought, because they are going to be crossing day in, day out. It's just that it seems to me, and then obviously that can mean delays on either private business or commercial business, So that could be a significant adverse issue if it isn't mandatory before that date, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's up to the insurance companies, I think, in both places, both jurisdictions, to communicate with people that they will need to carry green cards in that situation. And I think they are going to do that.
Well, could I ask, Minister, if it was reasonable that you would come back to us, if you would correspond with the insurance companies to get clarity on will they issue that card automatically to people in border counties? Because I think that would be important.
Yeah, I think they will be required. They will be required to carry it. The people will be required to carry it. So they will issue it on demand, I think, rather than anything else. But they will be required to have it. It will be a requirement.
Sorry, there won't be any cost implications with insurance companies for issuing a green card, will there?
Not that I know of. I don't know. I haven't heard of any cost implication. In other words, paying for the green card.
Yeah, because I mean, many of the companies that will be issuing these green cards will be operating both in the north and in the south. So it shouldn't be, but I just...
Well, if somebody leaves Drogheda or Dundalk or Newry or whatever, they're going to have it.
Yeah.
If you don't have it, what are the implications? That you're deemed not to have insurance technically in the other jurisdiction, because the proof of insurance is the actual green card, so you won't be let in.
Well, the green card is proof that you're insured, right? In the country that you're visiting.
I'm just trying to find out, if you don't have a green card, what happens to you?
Not having a green card to stop could lead to difficulties in proving that you're insured to drive. Not having it could lead to difficulties. Yeah.
But I'm not being...
I don't know the answer to that question specifically.
Could you get us
will they be prosecuted for it? It's certainly they are required to.
It's not even that you'll be stopped. It's on check. Sorry, Deputy Minister.
Again, we're talking about preparedness here, and as I said, we're 7 weeks away. There's 34,000 journeys done cross-border every day. 34 people travel, and there's 68 journeys every day, should I say, 68,034 people travel. And you're talking about, there was talk there one time of, I think it was 25 million journeys per year on 15 border crossings. Now we've 300 border crossings. And you're talking about something, if I'm just heading up the road to Armagh, 40 minutes away. Now, again, as I said, come back to preparedness, right? People are on shore come the 30th of March. If they have to have this on on them, with them. If they're in a crash, are they covered? If they haven't got it, how do they go about it? Will there be a cost to it? All of this information. Now, I don't know whether we're waiting until the 11th hour to put this out, but for the 34,000 people that cross the border on a daily basis need to know well in advance what they need, how they apply for it, when they get it, what they're covered for, will it cost them anything, how long will it take to get. It's about preparedness, Minister.
The legal point is if you don't have it, even if you have insurance, where does that leave you?
If you don't have it and you're in a crash, you're
that is not clear yet. You're quite right, but it will be clear.
The question of being stopped to being requisitioned to produce it. I think that there are issues. I accept, Minister, that you don't represent the insurance.
But I can answer. I can answer a couple of them. I mean, whether it costs anything, that's a competition matter. That'll be between up to the company.
But we need to get clarity in that for everybody. I think.
Information, Minister, just
if you write
people know, so we've a bloody plan.
Does this fall within your remit, or is this a different department? Because it strikes me if there isn't going to be, if goods and all of the other things are not going to be part of this legislation, like it might be that's revenue because it's customs and excise. It might be finance. I don't know. But in relation to this, if you don't have insurance in a jurisdiction, some jurisdictions can seize your vehicle, for example. There could be fairly serious implications. And if it is under your remit, it would be really helpful for us to have some practical, you know, this could happen if you don't have that. Maybe we get it from the insurance companies, maybe you get it through the insurance companies, maybe it's not even your area.
Yeah, this isn't all clear yet. You're quite right. I mean, it's not all clear yet. What is not clear, it will be clear certainly by in due course. It's not clear yet whether people will be prosecuted or not. What we do know is it's going to be required, right? Yes, it will be mandatory for people to carry these if they're going in another jurisdiction, and they may be asked for it. So we do know that. There are 400,000 green cards being printed. 400,000, which is an extraordinarily large number. And the insurance companies are going to carry out a campaign to let people know how to get them on demand. They'll advertise. They'll be making sure that, I suppose, in every possible way that people know exactly what their rights are under it. But this is only just. But we are talking, and you've got to understand this. We're talking in a very short time scale, and we have to do things very, very quickly. And for people to say, people quite rightly say, OK, everybody's got to know this in time. They're going to know it as quickly as possible. But we are talking in a very, very narrow framework.
There's clarity if it's mandatory. What is the legal position? You know, if you're stopped and all of that. Like, I mean, for the public out there, if you had the wrong guy checking everybody at the border, you'd have complete chaos.
Well, that's not anticipated.
I'm not saying that's what you want.
That's not anticipated at all.
No, but I see it happening if people don't have the cards.
Yeah.
I think. Pardon?
Is that part of this legislation?
That's what we're trying to find out. Yeah.
It's not part of the legislation. No, here it's not at all. But it will become apparent, I think, in the next few weeks, exactly whether people will be prosecuted, because that's a fair question. But it's not known yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
you have to understand, Chairman. I mean, there are issues, a large number of issues, which still remain to be resolved on this.
I think on that, Minister, and I appreciate fully what you're saying to us. You know, if we need another meeting on this, we should have it well before that date. Can we take the heads of the bill and then we go back to all the questions people have? So we take it that we accept the heads of the bill in part one. And I will now ask the Minister to, if you want to break for a few minutes, if you'd like to break for a few minutes. Yes, and then we'll come back, say, at what, 3:10, if that's okay. That's 15 minutes. Suspended. Well, the Minister is happy to take a break. And so am I. To 3:10. I will come back. Suspended till then. Thank you. We will now resume in public session. We have completed our consideration of the heads of the bill. The second part of our meeting will focus on preparations for and the impact of Brexit on the transport sector in Ireland, particularly in the event of a no-deal scenario. So, Minister, you're happy to hear your opening statement in this regard.
Well, thank you again for asking me to address this second part of the agenda today. There was a unified EU reaction to developments last Tuesday in Westminster. President Tusk reiterated that the backstop is part of the withdrawal agreement, and the withdrawal agreement is not open for renegotiation. I think he reiterated that actually today again, in even stronger terms, more colourful terms anyway. In a debate held by the European Parliament the following day, President Juncker emphasised that the withdrawal agreement was the best and only deal possible. He said that the Commission would continue to support Member States' work on preparedness. Michel Barnier repeated that the withdrawal agreement, including the backstop, would not be renegotiated and that it offers the only realistic solution to the problems created by Brexit. The Government remains firmly of the view that the best and only way to ensure an orderly UK withdrawal from the EU is to ratify the withdrawal agreement. My department, and indeed all government departments, have intensively advanced their preparations and planning for a no-deal scenario, given the ongoing uncertainty in the UK. I and my department have been fully engaged on the very wide range of Brexit-related transport issues, and indeed on tourism issues, ever since the UK invoked Article 50. This includes working closely with other government departments and EU member states, meeting and working with the European Commission, and participating in technical EU-level meetings in the area of transport. Stakeholder engagement has also formed a very important part of our preparations and contingency planning. I've met with a number of my EU counterparts over the past 2 years, including recently my French opposite number, with whom I share many concerns. I've also met with the UK Secretary of State for Transport, Chris Grayling, on a number of occasions, and most recently late last year, as I said at the earlier session. I cannot emphasise enough that it would be impossible in a no-deal scenario to maintain the almost seamless arrangements between the EU and UK, currently facilitated by our common EU membership. If the UK becomes a third country on the 29th of March, without having ratified the withdrawal agreement with the EU, then a very wide range of EU rules in the field of air, road, rail and maritime transport will no longer apply to the UK. Of course, if the withdrawal agreement is ratified before the 29th of March, many of the preparations and contingency measures that I am about to detail will not be required. We have already spent the first portion of this afternoon discussing cross-border rail and bus services, although I think we erred into this territory from time to time. While there are many other Brexit implications for the transport sector, I will focus this statement on the other key risks that have been identified in a no-deal scenario. These are our continued aviation connectivity, the ability of our international road haulage sector to move to and through the UK, the potential impacts on our ports and airports as a result of the significant increase in the control requirements of the Departments of Agriculture, Food and Marine, the Department of Health and HSE, and the Revenue Commissioners carry out checks on imports at ports once the UK becomes a third country, and the impact on the UK land bridge. We identified our issues early on and have been preparing for a no-deal scenario in parallel to our preparations for the central case scenario. We've made significant progress in recent weeks on some of our biggest and most serious challenges. Ireland is heavily dependent on aviation links with the UK for trade and tourism. Some 44% of all flights to or from Ireland, approximately 113,000 flights a year, are to or from the UK. The sector contributes more than 4 billion directly to Ireland's GDP. The tourism sector is critically reliant on aviation connectivity, and spending by overseas visitors is approximately 5 billion, of which just over 1 billion is from visitors from Great Britain. Ireland would therefore be uniquely exposed by a no-deal scenario due to our heavy reliance on the Ireland-UK air transport market. Ireland, along with a number of other member states, strongly made the case to the European Commission for action at EU level to ensure continuity of air services in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The European Commission last year put forward a draft legislative proposal aimed at ensuring basic air connectivity in a no-deal scenario. This proposal is currently progressing through the Article 50 Working Party and will ensure continued air access between the EU 27 member states and the UK. And it's drafted on the basis that the UK will reciprocate the level of services, albeit for a limited period of 12 months. The measures proposed will, subject to reciprocity, provide a large degree of certainty to the Irish aviation sector and to the travelling public. The proposals will help to minimise disruption to air services for business, trade and tourism, and have been welcomed by our key aviation stakeholders. As with all contingency measures that the Commission has put forward, these measures are not intended to and cannot mitigate the overall impact of a no-deal scenario, nor can they replicate the full benefits of EU membership or the terms of the transition period as provided for in the withdrawal agreement, but we continue to convey our key concerns through the Article 50 Working Party. The aviation industry is fully aware of the position that has been reached. While not everything that the industry would wish for will be possible, the very real fears that aircraft might not be able to fly are being addressed. A fundamental legal principle of EU aviation is that air carriers wishing to operate in the single aviation market must be majority-owned and effectively controlled by EU nationals. Airlines which may not be majority-owned and effectively controlled by EU nationals post-Brexit, when UK shareholders are excluded, could lose their European operating rights. The European Commission has been very clear that it is essential for companies that wish to be recognised as EU air carriers to take all necessary measures to restructure and to ensure that they meet this requirement in time for the 29th of March. My department has continuously advised our aviation stakeholders of the need to examine their corporate structures to ensure they will comply with the provisions on ownership and control when the UK leaves the EU. That said, it is recognised that the timeframe in a no-deal Brexit scenario is very limited, and it will be challenging for community airlines to complete this restructuring as necessary in the time available. In view of these circumstances, it is envisaged that the EU contingency regulation for air connectivity will provide a time extension of 7 months to allow airlines impacted by the ownership rules to implement their restructuring plans subject to certain conditions. Ireland, together with a broad range of other most affected member states, is seeking to address all aviation-related issues so that difficulties for community airlines and inconvenience to their customers are minimised to the greatest extent possible, while recognising that a no-deal Brexit cannot mean the maintenance of the status quo and the advantages that would bring to the UK and its aviation sector without the obligations of EU membership. Since the UK triggered Article 50, the Department has been engaged in extensive consultations and meetings with other government departments and agencies and other public and private key stakeholders, in particular with the National Civil Aviation Development Forum. This increased and regular engagement with the NCADF has assisted both the Department and the industry in planning for and mitigating the risks associated with Brexit for the aviation sector. Roll-on, roll-off traffic between Ireland and the UK was 966,549 freight units in 2017. Currently, this trade into and through the UK by road is facilitated by the EU's community licence that allows international hauliers from EU member states to move within EU member states. In a no-deal scenario up to recently, the Commission had maintained that the ECMT multilateral quota system would be the only fallback for journeys between the UK and the EU 27. The system would only provide sufficient ECMT licences to cover between 5 to 10% of current UK-EU journeys, which would be wholly inadequate. Following very strong representations from Ireland and a number of other member states, the European Commission announced on the 19th of December a proposal to temporarily adopt measures for a 9-month period from 29th of March to allow access for UK hauliers to the EU to ensure basic road connectivity. This is also subject to the UK recognising EU licences and allowing access into the UK for EU hauliers. The proposal represents prudent planning and is very welcome. Ireland is very supportive of the Commission's proposals and is working closely with other member states in the European Parliament to ensure it is adopted in good time for Brexit. There has been a lot of uncertainty in relation to the legal framework for road haulage in a no-deal scenario. Bringing the Commission's proposal into force in advance of the 29th of March would remove much of the uncertainty that has surrounded this issue to date. While both the proposed aviation and road haulage EU Commission measures are temporary only, they do eliminate the immediate risk from March 2019 and allow time and space to find alternative and more permanent arrangements. The establishment of the additional controls at ports and at Dublin Airport is being coordinated by an interdepartmental group under the chairmanship of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, with representation from a range of stakeholders across government. The group has focused on 3 locations for which we are heavily dependent on connectivity to the UK. These are Dublin Port, Dublin Airport and Rossall Airport. The Office of Public Works has been tasked with delivering the required facilities for these agriculture, health and customs checks at these locations, and work is ongoing for both a no-deal and the central case scenario. I'm very concerned about the potential for disruption to and our reliance on the UK land bridge. A substantial proportion of our export and imports, including many time-sensitive or perishable goods, are transported by truck on roll-on, roll-off or ro-ro shipping services to and from the UK for direct UK trade, but a significant proportion of our goods make their way onwards through the UK road network or land bridge to reach EU ports. Indeed, it's estimated that 16% of the ro-ro or heavy goods vehicles traffic between Ireland and Great Britain is land bridge traffic. Of course, this all takes place at present in a relatively frictionless manner, as it is all within the single market. But if the UK becomes a third country from 29th of March with no agreement, then additional customs, agriculture and SPS controls will be required at EU continental ports that trade with the UK. There's been much speculation that French ports may become congested and that the much relied upon Dover-Calais maritime route may face significant delays. The Irish Maritime Development Office carried out a study for my department concerning the implications of Brexit on the use of the UK land bridge. The study, which was published last year, found that 3 million tonnes of merchandise trade with the EU moves between Ireland and the EU continent via the UK land bridge. The IMDO estimated that this equates to approximately 150,000 HGVs each year, which constitutes a weekly average of approximately 2,880 HGVs moving between Ireland and the continent via the land bridge, although there are peak times both within each week and on a seasonal basis. The total value of our trade using the land bridge was estimated to be 21 billion. Certain sectors are very reliant on the land bridge route. This trade is largely time-sensitive products such as agri-food, where the shorter journey times and high frequency of sailings allows a quicker route to market than direct sailings to continental EU ports. The IMDO study concluded that the land bridge is a strategically important route to market for many Irish importers and exporters, including, but not limited to, agri-food, seafood and other sectors trading in time-sensitive produce. These sectors would be particularly adversely affected by any deterioration in transit times or increase in costs, particularly in a no-deal scenario. And these sectors may not be able to opt for the direct maritime routes to the continent, given the longer journey times involved. Many of these exporters are likely to continue to use the land bridge unless additional delays on this route are such that the route would become unviable. Others may opt to instead transport goods from Ireland on direct shipping services to EU ports. Existing available capacity on direct maritime routes to continental EU ports will mitigate somewhat our reliance on the UK land bridge. This will, of course, depend on the nature of the product. My department, through its own work and through participation in the Land Bridge Project Group, chaired by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, continues to monitor the extent to which government agencies, at the Port of Calais in particular, are stepping up preparedness for checks on products from and flowing through the UK, which is critical for products that need the time advantage offered by the land bridge. Last month, as part of the government's preparations for a no-deal Brexit, I updated government on the potential implications for east-west transport connectivity with the UK and our wider EU and international trading partners in the event of a no-deal Brexit. I set out my concerns relating to the land bridge, and I also assessed the maritime capacity for direct sailings between Ireland and continental EU ports as a potential alternative route for trade currently using the land bridge, while recognising that the longer journey time on direct routes may not offer a viable alternative. Based on consultations with the shipping sector and wider, I consider that sufficient capacity will be available on direct routes to continental ports from end of March 2019, and if demand for further capacity arises, the shipping sector can respond quickly. I'm keeping this matter under review and will report back to government with a further assessment. There are many other important issues that the department continues to address and to prepare for. I think the ones I've covered today are the most pressing, but I welcome questions on everything. Thank you again.
Thank you, Minister. Just before I open it up, just going back to what I raised before the break, maybe it might be wiser if we could appeal, perhaps, as through the government or to your good offices, in terms of the green card, that we would recognise the existing relationships north and south in terms of their insurance policies, and that there wouldn't be a requirement to have a green card. To me, that would make the most sense of all, and indeed for the whole common travel area, because it'll be increased bureaucracy. It'll be a delay, a significant delay, if somebody wishes to have a delay, and it's just, we don't need it. We don't need a green card, in my view, if we can use your good offices, and I've no doubt that.
I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, under the Good Friday Agreement. Yeah.
In there too, look, I mean, we know that under the EU law now that you'll need a green card, and that if you were in an accident, you're not insured. So it's a case of, unless the EU, the British and Irish government step in to find some form of dispensation, and.
Derogation is sought.
To find some form of dispensation, so that come 7 weeks' time, we're not in that predicament. And I'm just curious, Minister, have you intervened in that matter? Has your department intervened? Have you requested them to intervene in that?
Yeah, I think just for you, no problem. I want to try and keep it, no problem with that. Then we go to the normal process of asking questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Right, okay.
I know it disappoints you, but the answer is yes.
Minister, you've this attitude that your own self-importance is far more than Brexit. You're deluded if you think that. I'm a border county and I'm seriously concerned, and the more answers I get from you, the more worried I become. Could we have access to that correspondence of where the Minister intervened?
Sorry, Deputy.
To ask for a form of dispensation. Okay, here, look, I think it's important. Can we have a copy of the correspondence where the Minister, he's just confirmed he intervened?
You can shout all you want.
So I'm not shouting, I'm speaking.
I'm sorry,
I'm speaking.
but I want... No, hold on a second. I'm the chair here.
That's right, and I'm entitled to speak, yes.
There's
And
nobody,
you interrupted me.
No, you're well aware, and I always ensure that everybody can ask as many questions as they want. There's no issue there. What I'm trying to put is the way we deal with the questions here, that normally we deal with in the order which we always do.
Yes.
And that's the
but it was
point I want
yourself
to
that
make.
brought I was actually going to, but I was waiting my turn and you brought it, and I came in on foot of what...
I'm going to call Senator O'Mahony
Well, could I have an answer to my question
You
first?
can, when the time comes.
Could we be furnished with the correspondence?
Minister, I want
the Minister intervened. I can FOI it if need be, if you're going to block it, Cahirlock, so I'm just asking.
I'm sorry. I'll adjourn this meeting for 5 minutes. Meeting is now adjourned. We're in private session. It's suspended.
Oh, good enough.
Okay. No, if I can go into committee, yes, sorry. There's no problem. Deputy Munster's question. I will make that correspondence, happily make that correspondence available to you. And to go on, there's an option under the Motor Insurance Directive which would allow the European Commission to set a date from which the carrying of the green card would not be required. The Commission has not agreed as yet to the setting of that date, but we and Foreign Affairs have been pushing them to do that.
Sorry, no, I wasn't talking about. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I wasn't talking about the date, Minister. We know the date. But we're talking about some form of dispensation. Have you intervened between your government, the British government, and the EU? Have you personally intervened for some form of dispensation so that people don't have to carry that green card?
Yeah, we have. I think I've said that already.
Right, okay, and you'll furnish
3 times
the
now.
following the correspondence. Yeah. Okay, that's
Senator O'Mahony.
Thank you, Chair, and could I again thank the Minister for his information in relation to the topics here, the aviation, the road haulage, the corporate structure of the airlines and the land bridge. And I suppose to summarise what you've said, I think that there's obviously these aren't going to be as seamless as what we were talking about in the earlier about the rail and bus passengers between here and Northern Ireland. But I do welcome, I think I asked you a question here over a year ago in relation to would flights be grounded if there was no deal, and I think your information today is telling us that that won't happen. And it's interesting that I think in taking all of the items together, you mentioned about a 12-month period. A 12-month period of, I suppose, transition from to what it is now to what it will be in the post-Brexit era, provided the UK reciprocate. You talk about 7 months, if you like, transition period for the airline companies to restructure, and I think then you talk about 9 months period of transition for the road haulage companies to get their, if you like, access or to clear up the issues that they would have. So I suppose my only summary of all of that would be it's very welcome, because at least we're not going to fall off a cliff on the 29th of March. But I suppose it could be summed up as well as, if you like, a transition period being given at the behest of obviously representations that your department and the Irish government made to the EU or from the EU. It wasn't. I gather from what you've said is that it wasn't requested by the UK, which is interesting, and maybe would relate to what Senator O'Cage said earlier, that telling their businesses in the north to get seek information from the south, landing it in our lap again. But it's welcome information. I suppose the question, a few questions on all of that then would be, you do mention though that it won't mitigate the overall impact of a no-deal scenario, these arrangements. So I suppose maybe if you could explain a little bit more what won't be mitigated in this new arrangement, and then that the aviation industry didn't, I suppose, are fully aware of the position, but they're not everything that they would have wished is possible. So I suppose what is not possible that they wished for, that'd be a question. In relation to the change of corporate structure of the airlines, I think I'm aware of, maybe is it Ryanair that have started the steps of doing that. Are there many of the airline companies that are in that process at the moment? The other one is the land bridge. Obviously, that's and the road haulage. I mean, how do you see that, if you like, the outcome of all of this? Because I think in many ways the road hauliers and the amount of throughput on the land bridge that's used in the UK, particularly in relation to the perishable goods, is a huge issue. And how do you see that can be resolved in any way satisfactorily? But I welcome the information that you've given us, that there is at least a transition period to get some of these issues resolved. Thank you.
Sorry, Deputy Troy.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I suppose from the outset I want to acknowledge the good work that has been done by the Department of Transport in addressing some of the huge challenges that we thought would be upon us at the end of March, and particularly in relation to the connectivity with our airlines. I think that has to be acknowledged, and while the Minister did, to be fair, acknowledge it's not resolved, there is a temporary arrangement in place to ensure that our airlines can continue to fly. A few direct questions, Minister, just in relation to the 10T network. I recently asked a parliamentary question in relation to that. I think, given the fact that the UK is leaving the euro, the network needs to be changed, because what was included as part of the UK will no longer be part of the 10T network. It's down for review in 2023. You did say in a PQ reply that you're liaising with the Commission, and I'm just wondering, can you update us any further in relation to that, because I think that's very, very important in relation to our maintaining connectivity in the EU. I'm not going to labour on the point of the green card that has already been laboured. You did say that we're still awaiting a decision. Is there any time frame as to when that decision will be made? And then what's the processing time to issue a green card, i.e. if the decision comes that a green card is necessary, is there any fear that we won't be able to process that in time for people who rely on it? Just in relation to the aviation sector, we received a today, and I'm just wondering, Minister, the 2018893, what consequences will that have on the aviation sector here in Ireland? I also want to ask in relation to, while we acknowledge that connectivity is going to be maintained under the transitional arrangements that has been agreed, my understanding is that what has been agreed won't allow any further growth. Can you confirm that? And if that is the case, what effect will that have on, say, Aer Lingus and AIG, who plan to expand their business between Ireland and North America, and their desire to have Dublin as an international hub? There's no mention in your statement, Minister, in relation to the application of maintenance certificates issued under EU law by EASA. Specifically, where Irish maintenance firms conduct maintenance currently, how is that going to be dealt with? Or will Irish firms such as Airtech, Dublin Aerospace, etc., will they continue to be able to provide certificates, or are we in danger of losing business to Singapore or non-EU Eastern European countries who are already competing with us for that business? Irish cargo operators such as ASL, who have major European and UK cargo distribution contracts, again, perhaps should confirm to me, Minister, under the transitional arrangements, they're not permitted to take on any additional work. So there's essentially a cap in place in terms of the amount of cargo they can carry to the UK. And I just would have a concern in relation to the impact that may have on the pharmaceutical industry, who need this distribution in place for transporting very sensitive merchandise. Just then, if you don't mind, Minister, just to move over to, I suppose, the effects maybe that's on the road haulage industry and our ports. You mentioned the Office of Public Works has been tasked with delivering the required facilities at our ports. Are you satisfied? I visited Dublin Port, and to be fair to them, they're well underway in terms of the works that's needed to be done to adapt to the new requirements. But are you satisfied, number one, that the infrastructural changes that are required will be in place in time? And number two, despite repeated parliamentary questions in relation to the number of officials, you always refer to another department. Are you satisfied that while the officials may not, the recruitment of the officials will not come under your remit, are you satisfied in your engagement with your colleagues that the necessary number of officials will be in place? In relation to the haulage industry, Minister, you have said to me in repeated parliamentary questions in relation to capacity in the ferry and the shipping companies, and you said that your department has been meeting with ferry and shipping companies regarding their plans to deal with Brexit. You're quite confident that they are going to be able to respond should the need arise. But can I ask quite specifically, Minister, what shipping companies are you in consultation with? Where exactly are the capacity going to, is the capacity going to come from? Because if you look at the moment, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, between Dublin and Rosslare currently, there's approximately 750, the capacity for 750 lorries a week to mainland Europe. But from Dublin port alone, 1,000 lorries a day use the land bridge. So if the land bridge becomes problematic, if it becomes a situation where there's large tailbacks, and the people who need to get their produce to mainland Europe are saying we can no longer deal or use the land bridge, where is the capacity going to come from, Minister? Because, as I said, 1,000 trucks per day leave Dublin Port to the UK. If 80%, some of the figures that have been quoted say 80% are only using it as a land bridge and going on to mainland Europe, where are we going to make up that capacity? And I'd like to know who you've who you have engaged with, and will you commit to ensure that Rosslare Europort will be utilised, and that we will have a competition within that port to ensure that our hauliers who rely on Rosslare Europort to get to mainland Europe will have an alternative in place come the end of March. The UK government have advised that they will not have transit offices established at their ports for at least 6 months following Brexit. Irish operators must travel under the Common Transit Convention to get access to continental Europe to avoid import and export procedures. This programme is reliant on tracking when and where the load enters and exits a third country en route between member states. Can I ask, if the UK do not have transit offices, how are France preparing to accept Irish loads using the land bridge? Can the Minister confirm what the contingency plan is in relation to this, and confirm if the CTC is workable if the UK do not have established transit offices? You said that you have engaged in a lot of stakeholder engagement over the last while, and I think it's critical that that happens. It's critical to develop effective contingency plans. Can I ask, Minister, can you advise of what stakeholder meetings you have had in terms of Revenue, Gardaí, Department of Agriculture, representative bodies, the Road Hauliers Association, the Freight Transport Association, importers and exporters, because they are key in terms of outlining what their concerns are in terms of how we can address the challenges of Brexit. I think I had one other question.
Our members will be coming back. Yeah, no problem.
Sorry now. Yeah, and just finally, in relation to the fact, if there is a no-deal Brexit on the 30th of March, and Minister, are you confident that we will be able to carry out the regulatory checks that are going to be required for goods coming in and out of Ireland? Will we have sufficient staff in place? I don't think so, based on PQ replies that I've received. And if we don't, has there been any engagement? Has there been any engagement in terms of agreeing a transition arrangement in imposing the regulatory checks? I.e., will the EU allow a period of months evolve so that we can bring our officials' staffing levels and requirements up to a level that will be required in order to carry out all the checks? Because quite simply, if it's a hard fall off the cliff on the 30th of March, we don't, in my opinion, have the personnel, the key personnel in place to carry out the regulatory checks that will be a requirement thereafter.
Deputy Munster.
Just going through the briefing document that we got, can I ask who wrote the document, the briefing document? Is there somebody in the room that actually wrote the briefing document? Yourself, is it? Yeah. Mr. Burke. Just in relation to, on page 2 of the document, it states, paragraph 3, there are a range of other issues that arise as a result of a no-deal Brexit if the withdrawal agreement comes into force. Many of our preparations and contingency measures will not be required. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Burke, if you can tell me precisely what your preparation measures were and your contingency measures were.
For a moment there, I want to be fair to everybody, and you're quite right to ask your questions. I just want to make sure that we answer them after we've finished the round. I think that's the way we've done it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yes,
so
once I get.
I know.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure
and,
that.
Yeah.
I just want to just be very
okay,
clear.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Excuse me. I just want to be clear for everybody, including our witnesses, that they don't answer until everybody's asked all the questions.
Yeah.
So
no, I just wanted to find who was the person in the room that wrote the briefing document. Just your plans and your contingency measures, and will they be sent on to the committee? For example, you know, meetings, emails, were there minutes taken at the meeting? If you could answer that question for me and see if we can be furnished with all that. The other issue is it's in relation to infrastructure and controls at ports and airports, page 3 of the document. I mean, we know the British and Irish chambers have identified that Cork, Rosslare, etc., will need additional bills for agricultural checks. So I'm just wondering, given that we're already aware of that need, how much of an allocation has been given to the ports over and above what was estimated in the budget? You know, was there an allocation, an extra allocation made in the case of a no-deal Brexit? Because, from my understanding, the last budget was based on a deal being signed. So, what extra does the Minister plan to bring to the table? And if he's not bringing extra funding for that, then obviously there's going to be cuts. So maybe you could outline where the planned cuts were. The other one then was page 4 of the briefing. The Minister, his preliminary assessment is that sufficient capacity will be available on direct routes to continental ports from the end of March 2019. And Deputy Troy had touched on that. Is that based upon conversations, or what exactly is that based on? And I think you did give the figure for trucks using the land bridge, but overall I was just wondering what percentage of trucks would use the land bridge going through to Dover, and what percentage, say, would use percentage of trucks would use the direct route to Europe, and with that percentage, is he saying that, you know, if depending, say for example, we say there's 75, anywhere from 75% that use the land bridge. If those trucks are not prepared to to sit in 17-mile tailbacks, for example, and they have, you know, perishable goods, or they might have to bring, say for example, factory parts, you know, and have to get them as soon as possible. if they decide, if they're not prepared to sit in those 17-mile tailbacks, if they decide then to go through Irish ports directly, right, will there be sufficient capacity at Irish ports? And are you saying that there'll be no need, for example, I mean, you'd imagine we'd have to lease ships. So are you saying that there's sufficient capacity there, that there'll be no need to lease ships to deal with the capacity? And just, has the Minister looked, or the Department looked at the cost of leasing a particular ship to deal with that? And I'd be interested to find out what that cost of that would be, and how many in your plan that you predicted would be needed to cater for that, and would that capacity be all there? So it reverts back to my first question about your preparation measures and contingency plans, if we can see all that, and how all that plans to fall into play. The other one then was just in relation to international road haulage. There was a piece here that said the European Commission announced on the 19th of December that a proposal to temporarily adopt measures for a 9-month period from the 29th of March to allow access for UK hauliers to the EU to ensure basic road connectivity. Is this regardless of a no-deal Brexit? Is it regardless of, or is it part of the overall kind of deal as such? I'm curious about that. So if there is a no-deal Brexit and this doesn't stand, what's our plan? Where is our plan?
Just before I call Deputy Fitzmaurice, so I'd just like to say a couple of points strike me here. One is that the more I hear about this whole hard Brexit, the more difficult it's going to become, and the more traumatised our economy may very well be. And I welcome the progress the Minister and his department has made in his discussions so far. But one thing that strikes me is that even if you had the capacity in Rosslare, a lot of the time-sensitive goods that would otherwise have gone through the land bridge, they're not going to be able to, they're going to perish, basically, unless we reach a significant concession with the United Kingdom. I think that's hugely important. And I think it would be in the interest of the UK as well, because nobody wants any perishable goods to be held up on the entry to the Europe or coming across either. So the whole thing is fraught with complexities, and I think I think people talk about going over cliff, that's exactly what it is. And just a couple of other points I want to make. I mean, the committee has agreed that we would visit that we'll visit Rosslare, that we'll visit Dublin Airport, Dublin Port. We'll have a border visit and so on in the next few weeks. So, you know, that we're very, very concerned about all of this. And on the sports side of it, Minister, I understand that that Down Royal Racecourse, its future, maybe it's under jeopardy, I believe, or there's concerns about, you know, Irish horses, which are the mainstay of that course usually, as regards the free movement of those horses up and down. And that's just a small little indicator, but it's significant for the people concerned. So I think that I'll take, sorry, Deputy Morris now, but I just feel that on the air issue, which has been raised by Deputy Troy, that this ComReg that we got today actually is a very serious one, and it has serious implications for the aviation industry, and arrangements, as you have said, which have already been made between carriers in the United Kingdom and in Ireland, and origin of, you know, between British Airways and Aer Lingus or Ryanair or whatever. So, Deputy Morris.
Sorry. Thanks, Chairman. Thanks, Minister.
Deputy Fitzmaurice, I'm terribly sorry. Yeah.
I don't mind what I'm called. Minister, on the 10th of January this year, you're probably aware, or I don't know whether your officials are aware or not, that in Brussels, in the Transport Committee, an amendment was put at the Transport Committee to include more parts of Ireland, was actually the Western Narc, or on TNT funding, but it also included The amendment stated under the European Commission's Brexit mitigation proposals in relation to the Atlantic corridor to include the ports of Shannon Foynes, which was always in it, Dublin, Rosslare, Waterford, Cork, to link Brest, Ruskov, Cherbourg, and look at this, 4 or 5 more places in France and different other countries. You'll be in Brussels, I presume, after that, because it didn't go to a vote, which is unusual. It was fully agreed. It's not going to a vote of MEPs. When you're in Brussels for the, I think it's a trilogue, is it what you call it, when you go over to Brussels in the coming weeks in a meeting with the European Commission, can you commit, because as is being pointed out by all deputies, the likes of Donegal and the west of Ireland has been badly affected. Under this amendment, and I presume you're accepting the amendment for Rosslare and for Waterford and the areas that has been included, this comes under the same as was in 2012 for basically along the Atlantic corridor, the Western Arc. Can you confirm that if this is the case, as which I've pointed out, that when you go to Brussels, that amendment is there? Will you give an undertaking that you will include the rest of the west of Ireland, which has been committed to in the programme for government? And I think that my understanding is that in the last few weeks that you've got a letter or an email or a letter from the AAC task force to get that area put into the TNT maps. And could you just make a comment on that or confirm that that area would be put into it? Because what we have to remember, Donegal, be it Monaghan, be it Sligo and those areas along the periphery of the border, Louth is in it at the moment because it would be up from Newry to Dublin. That those areas which will be, if there is a hard Brexit, will be hit ferociously hard, that will be included as was in 2012 and as is now in the programme for government that said it would do it, I think, a couple of years ago. Thank you.
If it's an order, Minister, while we're waiting, our 2 senators, if you could start to reply to Deputy Troy, if that's okay. And then we can take Senator Manley and obviously the commitment.
Okay, with your permission, I'll refer 10T questions to Mr. Burke because he's an expertise in that which I don't have. I mean, I can talk to him and then talk back to you, but I might refer that those ones to him. That'll be Deputy Fitzmaurice and Deputy Troy's questions on 10T. 10T. Deputy Troy asked about the network changes and about updating with the Commission. Would you be able to deal with those ones and the questions from Deputy Fitzmaurice?
Sorry, Deputy Munster's question and
no, I'm just trying to keep
just the two 10T questions.
Minister, if I just want to get this right, because I don't want people to be given out about me not being fair to everybody. I think Deputy Troy's questions should be answered first. And if there
10T is the first question he asked.
Yeah, no, just to make it right. And then we go on then to Deputy Munster if Senator Manley is not here. But I need to bring Senator O'Cady if and when he returns to make his contribution. So I just want to get that right. Yeah. Okay, apologies.
Thank you, Deputies and Chair. In relation to the Connecting Europe facility and 10T, there's 3 elements, I suppose, to what's happening in Brussels at the moment. There's one is a proposal for Brexit that's linked directly to Brexit, which is a realignment of the North Sea Mediterranean corridor, which is a corridor that runs from Ireland into the UK, Benelux, and into France and down to Marseille. And what's been looked at there is, with the UK leaving, how do we realign that corridor so that it will look coherent and will be coherent. And what the Commission have proposed, and we have accepted, is that it should be links in from Dublin Port, Cork Port, and we've asked for Shannon Foynes to be included in that as well. That would link into the northern French ports and would link into Belgium and Dutch ports as well. We asked, what we've looked for is for connections into the Zeebrugge, Antwerp, Calais, no, Sherbrooke is on the. Sorry, I'll get you the list, deputies.
You can come back to me if you want.
No worries. There is on a separate a separate aspect of what's happening is there's the funding for Thames T from 2021 is being renegotiated at the moment. It's a regulation that's been brought in. As part of that regulation, we have asked that we also be linked into Le Havre, which is on the Atlantic corridor. So it'll be two different corridors that we'll be linked into. And so far the Commission have accepted this. The French are very strong in favour of this as well. So what we'll have under the new regulation, if it goes through, as it is at the moment, is a link into the French ports and on the North Sea Mediterranean corridor and the Dutch and the Belgian ones, and also Le Havre on the Atlantic corridor. We can only connect into ports that are on the core network. And at the moment, those are the ports that are on the core network. As part of the renegotiation of the funding mechanism for 2021 onwards, we've also sought with both ourselves, Malta and Cyprus, we have looked to change the initial Commission proposal. And the initial Commission proposal was that they would only fund on the comprehensive network cross-border projects. And the rest of the comprehensive network, of which the vast majority is in Ireland, the vast majority of our network is on the comprehensive, that they weren't going to fund that. We did a joint position with Malta and Cyprus, and we also separately ourselves looked for any member state that hadn't or that wouldn't have a land border with another member state, that they would allow funding for all the comprehensive network. And the Commission have accepted that as well. So what it means that in the next round we'll continue to have funding available for the comprehensive network that wasn't in the Commission's original proposal. And on the remainder of Thames T, we have met with the Commission in terms of a review, Deputy, of the network, and we have asked for a review across the table with the Commission. We have yet to submit a full request to them, but we've raised at a working party as well that we would have a review in light of Brexit. That we would have a review. We have made in everything that we have kind of said to the Commission. We're conscious of the fact that Brexit has particular implications for connectivity from the island of Ireland into our continental markets, and that the absence of the UK from that will mean that areas, particularly in the west and the northwest, will become more peripheral. That would have been the case otherwise in terms of getting to the markets. And that's a part of the Commission that have been forthcoming in that, but we have asked at Working Party for that review. We've set it across the table. We have to formalise it in terms of a formal submission that will take account of what we will see as being the implications for Brexit.
Just that this is important, and thank you for your response. My understanding is an amendment has been passed by the Committee on Transport in Europe on the 10th of January. Are you familiar with that?
It's the Parliament, I think.
Yeah, it's the committee that sits of MEPs on transport. An amendment was passed that included Waterford Port, Rosslare Port, and all the different areas that I said on that. Now, if you look at the original that was here in Ireland in 2012, Waterford was connected through rail up to Galway. It was connected to Ballina. And what I am asking you is, if that amendment, which is going to, am I right in saying trilogue, where the ministers meet and that, is coming up in the next few weeks, is my understanding. That amendment, I presume Ireland is going to accept it because it's a good thing that you'll make a core node. But when that amendment is there, I presume that you can put in an amendment as well, which is my understanding, that the likes of Killybegs, Galway Port, or Knock Airport. Knock Airport can actually get, if you look at it, a special status because it's in a peripheral area. That because of the Brexit implications, my understanding is that's acceptable in Europe. And will ye go about it that way in the next few weeks, the way that we get it back onto it rather than having to wait a few years?
Part of the difficulty there, Deputies, is that it's only if you're on the core network that you can be on the corridors and on those realignments. And at the moment, some of those areas are not on the core network and therefore can't be part of the realignments. The corridors were also set on the basis that they linked the key urban nodes within a territory. And in our case, on the island of Ireland, that's from Belfast, Dublin and Cork. We have an offshoot in the Shannon Fines because of the maritime connection there. But what the Parliament are proposing my understanding, and we've raised this with the Commission, is that those areas are not eligible to be put on the core network.
Just to be clear, Waterford Port wasn't a core node, and it is now gone through on the amendment. Yeah. So just to be clear, that wasn't on the Dublin, Cork, or it wasn't on the Limerick.
No, but what's in the regulation at the moment is the comprehensive. We have two comprehensive ports, which is Rosslare and Waterford, both of those, but they're not core ports. The only core ports that we have in the island of Ireland, well, sorry, in Ireland, is Cork, and Shannon Fines is on the core.
But it is now on this amendment making them.
But I suppose the point to make is that at the moment you cannot go on any of the corridors unless you are in the core. So, and part of the reason that we'd be looking for a review is to take account of Brexit and what that means for traffic flows within Ireland and also off the island of Ireland.
Could you undertake, or give us an undertaking that you will go to Brussels, look at this, or look at this amendment, and if it's a case that Rosslare is getting that status that Shannon has and Dublin has, that Kellybegs, because it's right beside the border, that like the Galway Port and Knock Airport, that they are put onto the whole infrastructure of it to try and include more of Ireland. And I think Knock Airport can come under, there's a status in it called a peripheral area, which would allow for it to come in. Could you give that undertaking that you'll do that?
If I may interject, that's the reason why I've been looking for a review of the 10T network in order, and it was a commitment in the programme for government long before ever Brexit, but in light of the fact that Brexit has come around, I think it's more crucial now that we review the 10T network designation, and I suppose it would be kind of regrettable that no formal application for a review. I acknowledge you have raised it informally, but it would be kind of regrettable that no formal application has been made, and perhaps the Minister could inform us when is it their intention to make a formal application to accelerate the review of the 10T network, because I think with a review, from what Deputy Fitzmaurice is saying, that will enable other designation, other ports, other airports to be designated as part of the core network.
We can do just Senator Manny, just sorry. Okay.
Just to the Transport Commissioner, when she was before us a couple of, I don't know, was it 18 months ago now, did give an undertaking that, depending on that it was 2023, as Deputy Troy said, but because of the Brexit situation, that it would be reviewed earlier and that it would take into account the things that were being talked about here. So I think that it's important. Based on that, I would assume that Ireland would be pushing at an open door to review all of that, and by saying that, because they're not connected to the core area, that they're ruled out. I would imagine that a very good case would be made, because we are in a, if you like, for the want of a better word, a crisis situation in 3 weeks' time. So I think there's a saying somewhere that you always make use of a crisis. So if it can be possible, and it should be possible, to push an open door, the fact that the Commissioner said that would be looked at in the context if this thing went off the.
Sure, just on the point of information, that I appreciate our two senators were absent during the vote, so we took Deputy Troy's answers or questions in the interim, but once they're finished, I think, and Shandor Kadig, you have to speak yet, I think, ask questions, all right. So we'll give you the floor then. No. But I'll just try and get, Deputy Troy's answers, the rest of them, if you can, please, if that's it. Pardon? Sorry. Tara, sorry.
Okay. Okay, let me go back to Deputy Troy's questions. Okay. On the...
Before you go into the other answers, will you answer that specifically? What about the 10T and the review
certainly.
Of when you'll make a formal application?
That's fine. Yep, that can be done.
Put yourself, because it's
thanks,
government policy.
Can I just say, in terms of the proposal that I mentioned on the North Sea Mediterranean corridor, part of that proposal we think will call for a review anyway, because a number of member states, France in particular, and ourselves have been pushing for it. So that may call for a review, but we will also do the formal submission to the Commission looking for it. Can I also say, just on that, that the fact that Waterford and Rosslare are not on the core network, they're still eligible for funding under the trans-European networks. And we have talked to Rosslare as recently as Monday in relation to the next call. There's a current call that's out there for funds, and Rosslare are looking to see if there's projects that they can do in relation to that. So there's still eligible for funding that are there for projects that they have that fall within those calls.
Just to be clear, the reason was given to us a few years ago that it was privately owned. Would that be right?
The general
it was a unique ownership structure, right? We won't go into that. But what I'm saying is, it is now from this amendment. If you looked at the amendment that's gone in Europe, that it is now going to be put in under the 10T, and it will become a core node. If that can be done there, surely, with the, as Deputy Troy pointed out, with the Brexit in be it Leisure or Kennebegs, that's right beside there for a core node in Port and Galway and the likes of Knock, that you get the west and the northwest into the frame. If it can be done through an amendment, what they seem to have done in Brussels, that I presume Ireland will accept with open hands.
I think that point is well made there.
We still don't wiser, and with no disrespect to you, Mr. Burke, when the government intend to make a formal application to review the 10T network?
Sorry, that will happen shortly. We expect that to happen over the next couple of months.
It'll be very shortly. I can give you that assurance.
Okay. Choice questions, and then if Chandler or Katie wishes to say something,
Okay.
it would have gone back to him after Deputy Troy.
Okay, Deputy Troy's questions. Do you want me to do this? Yes, fine. He was asking about the time frame for green cards. I've got no firm indication, but the insurance companies plan to begin issuing green cards in March 2019 in the event that no agreement has been reached between the UK and the UK at that point. A period of 1 month's advance notice will be required for the delivery of individual green cards, and the MIBI, Motor Insurance Bureau, will be undertaking a public communications campaign in the event that they are proceeding with the issuing of green cards. But I shared that with what the Chairman said earlier, a desire that they should not last forever, and that the earlier that we can take them out of existence, the better. But I have no indication they won't be done. On the 893, which I think several people, the note that you got today, that's just really a revision. On the 19th of December, the European Commission published a draft proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on Common Rules ensuring basic connectivity with regard to withdrawal of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland from the Union. The objective of this unilateral measure is to lay down provisions to govern air transport between the EU and the UK following the latter's withdrawal from the EU. The measures, and this is important, are subject to reciprocity with the UK and will only apply for a period of 12 months or until such time as a comprehensive air transport agreement between the UK and the EU has been concluded under the future relationship. The proposal provides for the unilateral grant of first, second, third and fourth freedom air traffic rights to UK air carriers. These rights enable UK carriers to overfly, make technical stops in EU territory, as well as to serve direct routes between the respective territories. It's currently the subject of discussions at the ad hoc working group on Article 50. As the proposal is evolving, elements such as the inclusion of fifth freedom traffic rights for all cargo services, cooperative marketing arrangements such as code sharing, and issues related to aircraft leasing are still being teased out. Under the current proposal, the vast majority of flights to and from Ireland to the UK would still be able to operate post-Brexit. Furthermore, it's my understanding that charter flights operated by UK charter airlines from airline to other EU member states or beyond would no longer be possible under the current proposal, as it does not cover services between two foreign states, that's seventh freedoms. The relevant charter operators and tour operators have been advised of this by officials from my department and by the Commission for Aviation Regulation. You asked a question too about ASL. I think the department met with ASL yesterday, was it? And they have no real concerns about air freight. There was a cap on freight at summer 2018 levels. OPW.
There is a cap on air freight at summer 2018 levels.
It's on freight.
Yeah.
Not passengers, no.
Yeah.
No. Okay. The OPW facilities. Yeah. Let me just address that. I've absolutely no reason to doubt that the OPW is not providing and will not be able to provide what are the necessary measures on the 31st of March. It's going to be a hurry. This is difficult, but it's been tasked by the government to establish the necessary infrastructure based on the requirements of the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health, Food and the Revenue Commissioners, and another department. Dublin Airport has been assessed, and the current facilities are regarded as adequate for a no-deal Brexit. As they stand, they're regarded as that. In addition to the permanent facilities being developed, separate sites to the central case sites have been identified for the no-deal scenario, and implementation work is commencing to provide at these sites. In Dublin Port, refurbishment works for inspection facilities and cold storage, parking and checking area, staff accommodation, traffic management systems within the port. And at Rossall Airport, obviously it's to a smaller scale to that in Dublin, they are providing for inspection areas, parking areas, staff accommodation, modifications to existing buildings, traffic management systems within the port. And OPW are already on site in Rossall and in Dublin, and in Dublin Port. My colleagues are working to ensure that sufficient staff for customs, etc., are there to be able to implement what will be necessary at the end of March. I'm extremely confident and really fairly... Nobody can say they're happy with the situation, then we're not going to be happy with the situation, but I'm very confident that everything is going to be done which can be done to make sure that we're in an optimal situation on the 31st of March. On the 30th of March, sorry. Haulage. Yeah.
I did ask about the maintenance certificates issued by the EU.
By the way, sorry?
The maintenance certificates issued by the EU under EU law by EASA.
I'll have to come back to you on that. That's why I haven't got an answer, but I will come back to you on that. I'll come back to you at the end if we have an answer now. Otherwise, I'll come back to you afterwards.
Important.
Yeah. Okay. The haulage. Yes, there have been meetings with haulage companies. I'll just get you the details if I have them. I'll have them shortly. Here we go. The Department has kept in close contact with road haulage stakeholders throughout the Brexit negotiations, such as the Irish Road Haulage Association, the Freight Transport Association, Ireland IBEC, the Irish Exporters Association, the British Irish Chambers of Commerce. The Department has also been liaising with these bodies in relation to the Commission's no-deal road transport proposal. On Monday, the 21st of January, my department hosted a stakeholders forum for road transport and maritime interests, including industry representative bodies in haulage, to inform them of the latest Brexit developments. My department, along with the Department of Foreign Affairs, Revenue Commissioners and the Department of Agriculture, addressed the group, stressing the importance of attendees disseminating the information provided as widely as possible. Similarly, a number of departmental officials took part in a Brexit seminar for local chambers of commerce hosted by Chambers Ireland on the 10th of January, so that local chambers could in turn brief their members on developments. As recently as last week, or the week before last, I met the Freight Transport Association of Ireland on Tuesday, the 29th of January. My department continues to work with the industry representative bodies to keep hauliers and enterprises informed of developments and prospects, as indeed is our long-established practice. We will continue to update the information on the department's website as further development arises. Okay. Irish, no. Yeah, the issue of land bridge. Where will the capacity come from? Land bridge is a problem. Let's not, you know, that is a really, land bridge remains a problem. We may well sort out, you know, all the other problems to a certain degree, but land bridge, it is a problem at the moment, particularly for what people have mentioned in perishable goods, and we don't quite know how bad it's going to be. But we have taken a lot of measures and precautions and done a lot of work on looking at the alternatives. And that's obviously, in that sense, we're talking about the ferries and the capacity, which Deputy Troy alluded to. And if people stop going on land bridge for various reasons, maybe because it's too crowded, or maybe because there's a time factor of delays, where will they go instead? My officials have met with, I can't remember exactly which, but they've met with many of the ferry groups. Have you got a list of them there? Yeah. Department's met with, Irish Ferries, Stena, CLN, Copperfret, I can't read this handwriting, Doyle Shipping Group, I think virtually everyone. There are others there as well, Brittany Ferries and P&O, to see what the capacity is like. And their conclusion from this is that there is certainly the capacity there to substitute for the land bridge if alternatives are needed. We know, everybody knows about what the W. Yates is doing. They know that there's another ferry being employed as well, being bought as well. And the capacity, they think there's plenty of spare capacity. It's not obviously an exact science, because you can't predict how many people are going to move from the land bridge and what the effect's going to be. But they have looked at it very, very carefully, and they're confident that at the moment there's no need for a more dramatic intervention, like leasing or vouchers or anything like that, but the capacity will be there. But we'll have to see how the individual companies respond to what happens at Landbridge, and whether there is a danger to perishable goods. And there is obviously a difficulty. There's going to be disruption, but there is a difficulty because Landbridge is shorter and quicker as it stands at the moment, and that there will be longer journeys on the ferries. But let there be absolutely no doubt that this has been gone into in very, very great detail, and I think I'm reporting back to the Cabinet on that in February. Yeah.
Minister, you may be missing the point.
Yeah.
We've already seen one company pull out of Rosslare. We've a situation,
that's Irish Ferries,
yeah. We've a situation where the shortest route between Ireland and mainland Europe is to depart from Rosslare. If there is problems in terms of the land bridge, time delays, backups, long queues, I've outlined the number of vehicles that are currently going from Rosslare to Europe. I've outlined the number of people who are going, the number of trucks per day going from Dublin port using the land bridge. There's a significant number of trucks using the land bridge, a far greater percentage than what's sailing directly. If there is problems there, how quick or how confident are you that there will be an alternative in place? You say your department officials have met with the relevant shipping companies, but do we know that if a ship is needed to be put in place from Rosslare to France, how quick will that be? How quick can they respond?
I think I very much regret what happened in Rosslare and the pull-out, but that was a regrettable but a commercial decision made by a particular group. Let me just answer that. In terms of the impact of this decision on capacity, the company's investment of 150 million, the new W. Yates, to serve the Ireland-France route will still significantly increase its year-round freight capacity between the island and France and increase its summer tourism capacity by 20%. So if the capacity is there, which it will be, and we can see that from the WB Yates, we'll fulfil that part of the problem. What we are not certain of, I presume, and it would be irresponsible and wrong of me to say so, that we have got an instant solution to the time problem. I don't know whether we have or whether we haven't, because I don't know whether there's going to be, what the delay is going to be like in Dover, so we will have to wait and see what that is. And I don't know whether perishable goods are going to be affected or not at this stage. But we're going to do absolutely everything we can to ensure that the alternatives work.
Going from Dublin port, using the land bridge, if 80% of them are using the land bridge to go to mainland Europe, that's 800 trucks a day going through the land bridge to mainland Europe. 5 days a week, that's 4,000 trucks. At the moment, there's only 750 trucks going from Rosslare to Europe. That's what the capacity is there at the moment. Where are we going to, or how are we going to increase the capacity from 750 trucks a week to in excess of 4,000 that could potentially be needed? And one ship is in its loan, you keep referring to WB Yates, one ship in its loan is not going to be able to do that. What is the capacity of the WB Yates ship?
60,000 units per annum, I think, something like that.
I think,
the
Minister, the other point on that is that the question of, like, the UK government, UK have the same problem the other way. Like, their produce going to market in Europe will be delayed, and obviously produce coming to them will equally be delayed. I know it's a different timeline from Ireland. Theirs is more difficult, but it should be. There should be a meeting of minds. Like, I mean, there should be a meeting of minds. There should be. Is it possible, you know, that in this area you could seek a special derogation, you know, even in the event of a cliff, going off the cliff, that things would continue up to, you know, because if they don't, you're going to destroy, companies are going to go out of business, there's no doubt about that. And produce won't be arriving, particularly for sensitive, time-sensitive goods.
Don't underestimate the problems that the delays may cause. Don't underestimate this is possibly the largest problem, but don't underestimate our capacity for resolving it either. And that is what we're actually doing. The strong view from shipping companies and from the department at the moment is that the state should not intervene directly at this time. That has all sorts of state aid implications and others which would be very dramatic. And the fact that can I just finish?
Sorry,
That there have already been responses from the shipping companies. Cobble Freight launched a new 234 ro-ro freight ferry, the MV Celine, with a capacity of 8,000 lane metres on the Rotterdam Zeebrugge Dublin route in October 2017. The Port of Cork, as you know, has got a new route from May 2018 with Brittany Ferries commencing the service to Santander, and we have the WB Yates. So, you know, that's a considerable capacity and increase and competition which exists on these routes. Shipping services are market-driven, and ferry operators have in the past responded to economic developments and increased or decreased capacity in response to these developments. Any new initiatives to enhance shipping services will continue to be market-driven. So I think, you know, where they see the gap, they'll fill it.
You're comparing apples and oranges when you're talking about. You're comparing apples and oranges when you're talking about going to Rotterdam Port, because we all know that the shortest and most direct sailing is between Rosslare and France.
Yeah.
And you know, you're going from a 16-hour sailing on average to a 28-hour sailing, and the goods that can go on one might necessarily be able to go on the other. So that's not competition for somebody who needs quick, direct access. And that's why I'm asking the question in terms of the capacity within that specific route, because that is the specific route that can only really offer any sort of an alternative to a problematic land bridge. Would you not accept that?
No, I'm not going to say that, because I don't think anybody. The fact that Irish Ferries has pulled off a route there is deeply regrettable, and it's something which is obviously very, very unfortunate, and it's something which I would wish had never happened. But what I have done is I've committed that my department is monitoring. We haven't made any final decisions on this, by the way, at all. Is monitoring this on a daily basis, and I'll be reporting to the government on it before the end of February, I think it was. Yeah, before the end of February. So that's in the next 3 weeks. But we don't want to make commitments which might have implications which might not be beneficial in the long run.
On that point, if you're here on the 27th, we could maybe get an update at that meeting at that time, if it happens.
Well, I don't know what date at the end of February. 27th.
No, I appreciate
as long as the 28th
that,
isn't a Tuesday.
I think the point that Deputy Troy is making is very well made.
Yeah.
And I think it is a huge concern. And I think everybody would be happier. And I know the department, when you've gone through the other consultative process you're presently doing, it might be a good idea to come back here. You know,
well, I mean, Deputy Troy is right. I mean, he's put his finger on what is a really difficult problem, and which is one which we are watching absolutely acutely in order to, on a daily basis. And,
thank you, Minister. Yeah. Very rarely admit that I'm right, but appreciate you admit.
I must be wrong. I must have made a mistake.
Senator Manley's answers, I think. Sorry, yeah.
And it was in relation to the lack of the UK advising that they're not going to have any transit offices established for about 6 months from following Brexit.
Yeah, that's actually a customs issue. That's a customs issue. It's, I can find out for you, but I don't have the answer to that because it's customs, not me.
Maybe a customs issue, but it has the potential to have huge ramifications in terms of backing up of hauliers on the road, which would be. So you might come back to me on that.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, Deputy O'Mahony. Sorry, I just have to turn a couple of pages back here. Where is it, Deputy Troy? Deputy O'Mahony, yes. Yes, okay. You referred to the 9 months, to the 9 months extension for road haulage and the 7 months for the airlines, and asked was a result of representations. Yeah, it was. I mean, there was a fairly difficult situation facing us a few months ago when the EU Commissioner was taking a kind of line that both on haulage and on the airlines, nothing really much was going to change, and in a no-deal scenario we'd have faced serious difficulties. That is now passed in terms of the fact that we have got more time to come up with a solution which we hope we'll be able to reach in the time made available for us. So we are confident that it's not going to be identical to the situation at the moment, but we're perfectly confident that the rail, the roads, the road haulage business, and that the airlines will be running a service which is perfectly acceptable and very close to what we have at the moment, as I said. So I think that's actually going ahead. I don't know what that means. Sorry. All Irish licence. Yeah.
You do make it clear, though, that that it won't be as seamless, and that there will be certain issues that aren't mitigated, and issues that the transport or the aviation people industry would want to have it better, or would want to have. I'm just wondering what's not in there in this period, or what would be the practical effect?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Yes, the ownership and control rules, which you'd be aware of, they prefer that they were changed. They're now not going to be changed in time. Isn't that correct? They're getting an extension as well. And as you know, and I think you've raised this issue as well, which companies are in the ownership and control process, which is now extended. I think they're all in that. I mean, Aer Lingus, Ryanair, Stobart, there's the PSO ones as well, all have to fulfil the ownership and control conditions sooner or later. If they're in the process, I think the CAR will look at them.
7 months to do that?
Yeah.
And that's in process from all of the companies, is it?
I don't think any company can get a derogation from that, can they? I think they will all be, they'll all have to be included in that. And that's obviously very serious for Ryanair, and it's very serious for IAG, but they will, which owns Aer Lingus, and they will obviously have to comply with that, as will Donegal and Kerry as well, which are serviced by Stobart, and they're all in talks about how they're going to do it. But as far as I know, the indications are very, very strongly that they're all in a process which will be successful. None of them are. I'm sure that it's not something they welcome, but it's something which they're prepared to comply with because they have to become European airlines. Okay. We talked about the road haulage and the resolution of the land bridge under Deputy Troy, but I just repeat here. Yep, this is being looked at. The resolution of that is being looked at extremely urgently, and everything is being. I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail, and you understand why, but there are all sorts of alternatives being looked at and ways of ensuring the land bridge doesn't become a huge obstacle in any logistical way as well. And they're being examined. The ferries is obviously the primary one, but if they're not fast enough, I think they'll look at other ways as well of doing that. And I met the French Transport Minister, and we were really, I think, at idem about the need to move trucks fairly fast through Dover and Calais as well. So, there is no reason for despairing, but there's reason for, energy.
So just one final point, and I'll finish then. Just the 12 months, 12 months, if you like, extension or whatever to keep the flights moving.
Sorry?
What needs to happen in that 12 months to allow that situation to continue in the case of a no deal into the future? In other words, are we facing another cliff face in 12 months if certain things don't happen within that period?
Well, I suppose the UK deal with the EU would be some sort of a prospect there if that were to happen. I mean, obviously the 12 months is to give us time to do that, and I don't anticipate that we will go over that cliff at any stage. It would just be unthinkable, and we would definitely. I think we can be confident that an arrangement will be made. A continuous arrangement maybe will be made, even if it's going to be difficult.
Thank you.
I don't know what the shape of it's going to be in the end, like any other one. Okay. Sorry, Deputy Munster. Yeah. Okay. Don't want any of this, haven't you? Yeah, you asked about the budget 2019. Yeah, that was based on a withdrawal agreement and a transition period. In a no-deal scenario, the government will look at any need for exchequer funding for the OPW when those costs are clearer and timing is known. So, no, the government will look at that, and you would be aware of the fact that the budget 2019 was based on a withdrawal agreement. That's true.
Yeah, that's what I
you're right.
Just about an additional, given all that's,
Yeah.
Sorry, just...
The percentage of tracks that use the land bridge to Dover, I have those figures somewhere. 16%.
Sorry?
16%.
And then... 16.
Oh, you asked about the haulage as well?
Yeah, sorry. In relation to the percentage trucks Dover versus the land bridge versus direct.
Yeah, 16% trucks use the land bridge, all right? Yeah.
16%,
Well, you looked, yeah, okay. You asked about the haulage and the situation about the contingency on road haulage. Yeah, it's a 9-month contingency. It's for a no-deal scenario. If there's a deal, there's a deal. But if it's a 9-month contingency, it's purely for a no-deal scenario. Okay.
That wasn't my question, Minister. My question was in the event of it...
In the what?
In the event of this not standing, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, what's your plan?
In the event of a no-deal Brexit?
Yeah.
We've got a 9-month contingency.
Yeah, but what's your plan? Have you looked into this at all yourself? I know you've got...
If there's a deal, the plan is done.
Yeah, but have you looked into it in any shape or form yourself? That's what I'm asking. Be your own prep or that?
Well, my department and I were pressing very, very hard when there was this really critical situation about haulage in recent months, when it looked like the number of licences available was only, at one stage, it was only about 5% of what was necessary. And this is a no-deal plan.
Okay.
This is exactly what it was.
Okay. Just in relation to the
I don't quite understand the question, but I mean, this is the result. Let me finish, please. This is the result of some very hard work over a period of time, and that's what we've got. And we've actually got a big change, which gives us a lot of breathing space.
Okay, thanks for that. Just in relation to the capacity at ports, I did ask about leasing of additional ships for trucks, and were there costings? Did you?
The details of that I wouldn't like to respond to, but I would just say this. Everything is being looked at. All alternatives are being looked at as an alternative to the land bridge, and in order to get goods from one place to another as quickly as possible without too much obstruction. That's absolutely the case, and all will continue to be looked at. At the moment, we have decided that certainly there is no intention, as of the moment, the same as of making any direct interventions by the state or by the department. That's under constant review, but we'll, and as I say, I'm reporting to the Cabinet about that at the end of February again.
Okay. Just my very first question I had asked, it was Mr Burke I directed it to, and I understand he probably can't go into it all now, but I'd asked about being furnished with all the details in relation to the plans and preparations and all the, whether it was the bilateral, discussions and plans, that sort of thing, meetings that you've said there were lots of meetings, emails back and forth, all of those correspondence. Can we be furnished with those?
I can't see any problem. Sorry.
Just on that, Deputy, the quote that you have from the briefing is, if the withdrawal agreement comes into force, many of our preparations and contingency measures will fall away. And most of the work that we've discussed here today, the vast majority of everything we've discussed today will fall into that category. It'll all be for nothing. If we have and that'll be good, because we'll have a withdrawal agreement. A withdrawal agreement will mean that we'll buy time, we'll buy a transition period up to the end of 2020, and we'll go immediately into negotiations with the UK at EU level on what a future relationship will look like. So nearly everything we've discussed here today will fall away if there is a withdrawal agreement. This is all, as the Minister said, it's a no-deal plan. This is all the contingency measures that we have for a no-deal. And all the work, a lot of the work that has been going on over the last few months in particular has been focused on these type of the issues that we've discussed here today. And sorry, and just to answer the final question, I suppose, is we haven't, because it's still an ongoing piece of work and because it's still part of the negotiations, we haven't released those type of documents, and even including for FOI requests, we haven't released them because they are deliberations of a public body at the moment.
The Minister's just said there he wouldn't have an issue with it. Isn't that right? Yeah.
As long as they don't come under categories which would be commercially damaging or confidential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we could be furnished with them. So
I don't make a decision on FOIs.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about. I'm just talking. I mean, we can go down the FOI route, but I'm saying if we didn't have to go down that route, would you be happy to be furnished with all? You've just said you would be happy.
I think if they're not sensitive commercially, we can make available all those where there are no good reasons for not making them available. I'm in favour of openness and transparency, but in certain circumstances, and don't interrupt me, please, Deputy Munster, every time I open my mouth. Please, Deputy Munster.
Can I just, if you address your remarks through the chair, is probably the best way to do it.
I'm very well
disposed. Minister as well.
Yeah, of course, and I apologise. I'm very open, as a matter of principle, to making available to deputies most documents. But if there are compelling reasons why they shouldn't be, I can see the reasons why they shouldn't be. But I'll try to be helpful.
That's fine. Yeah, just so we have the documentation on minutes, meetings, all that sort of thing. That'd be great to have.
Okay. Yep.
That is, sorry, Deputy O'Keefe.
Through the chair, Minister, just two questions. First question is, has your department, you can't touch it, I think, in consultation with the Department of Agriculture, as you know, live exports, cattle live exports, and especially calf exports, the fact now we could have controls and checkpoints, there will be delay in the movement, and this will have repercussion in regards to animal welfare and the boats and the cattle trailers. What measures are you taking to ensure that we will have a free flow of export of live cattle out of this country? Would they be given any preferences or priorities, in the movement of the livestock? Second issue is, he touched on the TEN-T network and the upgraded infrastructure, and that you were going to go to Europe and look for funding to upgrade some of the other ports, extra ports in the country. will you have to review the department section of the national planning framework and Project Ireland 2040? And just take for example Cork port, the port of Cork, right? It's pending on the development of the N28 in Ringaskiddy, the Dunkettle interchange, at the Jack Lynch Tunnel. That's come behind 6 months already. Should we not be bringing it forward? Fast track it for 6 months if we're going to have extra activity going to the port of Cork, or to encourage more activity in the port of Cork. So what I'm saying again, Minister, is infrastructure access is going to play a phenomenal part, and because of if there's a no deal Brexit, moving the transports will be in a different direction as such, as opposed to going to Belfast, or the lot will be coming down towards the Rosslayers and the Cork. Will you have to go back and your department go back and review, like the M20? Should it be fast-tracked even further, faster? M20 Cork Limerick, the Western Corridor. Would some of these infrastructure road networks have to be upgraded sooner and at the expense of other ones? In other words, will you have to reprioritise the road network infrastructure development programme? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. In relation to Cork Limerick, which is very important, and I understand that what you're saying is it's important to you particularly. It's included among a number of major national road schemes that were identified for development, as you said, during the period of the NDP. The Transport Infrastructure Island has provided an allocation of €2.15 million to Limerick City and County Council this year to advance planning and design work on the scheme. The Council is currently procuring the appointment of technical advisors for the scheme. It is anticipated that this appointment will be made early this year. This proposed project seeks to link the cities of Cork and Limerick with a high-quality transport corridor, as the Deputy will know. The existing route is deficient in terms of safety and capacity. Agreement has been reached between Cork and Limerick local authorities for Limerick to be the lead authority for this project. Limerick City and County Council will therefore need to assess all feasible options before a preferred route can be identified. The estimated cost of this project is €900 million. On the animals issue, the Department of Agriculture, and we will of course cooperate with them, you asked me that question, in any way we can, but it's their business. They've set life animal checks and also approved live animal hauliers. That's the Department of Agriculture's business. Both live animals transports attracts 100% inspections. Both compliance is high among approved hauliers. So I think I've answered your question. I hope we're going ahead with the Cork to Limerick road link. That is absolutely that's a commitment which we intend to keep. And if there are blockages or if there are real obstacles because roads are inadequate, we'd have to look at that.
Well, I welcome response, but the point I'm making here through the chair is, Project Ireland 2040 was done on the assumption that we were all a happy 27-member country and all going forward fine. But because of the change that could happen, right? And I just give you the example, the Dunkettle interchange, which is the major change being upgraded at the Jack Lynch Tunnel. That has already gone behind 6 months. Behind 6 months. When in an ordeal Brexit scenario, we should be bringing it ahead by 6 months. And I refer also to the N28, which is the link road from the South Link Road in Cork City onto Ringaskiddy, the major industrial estate, and the Port of Cork. And what I'm trying to say, ask you, Minister, will your department have to review your delivery programme for major projects because of if there's a change with the no Brexit situation?
Yeah, I see your point, and where these roads fall behind, I share your concern, and we'll keep reviewing it, and I'll refer any of those. If you like, I'll refer your remarks to TII. Okay.
Tá míle maith go a chathairlach.
Caiinteoir Darlach.
Agus aide agus a chóileach iad tá brónarm go orm imimeachtain sin ar fe couple of uaid. Few very short questions because you're all here since 1:30 or before that. 3 areas, Minister. One, the land bridge, trade 21 billion annually. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from memory, I believe that the total value of, or not the total value, total percentage of imports and exports through the UK, in and out of Ireland, and through the UK, is roughly 70% of all between imports and exports. Just want to see if that's, get your sense if that is correct. You may or may not have the information here. Obviously, it's of huge magnitude if that is the case. I also support Deputy Fitzmaurice Troy and Senator Mahoney in relation to their points earlier. I think they were very well made in relation to the EU Commission. The second one is it's in relation to VAT, and it may not be directly a Department of Transport issue, but it's indirectly so. For example, there's a big disadvantage for Irish coaches, for example. If you're an Irish-based coach, you are outside the VAT net, so fuel and maintenance, repairs and all of those is not reclaimable. But if you're a Northern Ireland or a UK coach company, or if you're dealing purely, an Irish coach company dealing purely with tourists, you can claim the VAT back. And that's quite a significant disadvantage to many coach operators, particularly, if I may say, in rural Ireland, where private coaches are so important to connect communities and get people from A to B. So I just ask, maybe it's kind of separate, but it's in some ways related. I'd really appreciate, Minister, if you might have a look at that and maybe get back to me if that's okay. The third area has got to do with EU airlines, and you probably knew I might raise this one way or the other. I have here a document from the European Commission Director General for Mobility and Transport in Brussels, dated the 18th of January of this year. It was sent to all stakeholders in relation to the withdrawal situation in the UK, the Brexit. And as of the withdrawal date, the EU rules in the field of civil aviation in civil aviation will no longer apply to the United Kingdom. So EASA rules, the European Aviation Safety Authority's rules, will not apply to the UK. So we're talking about totally 2 different sets of rules and guidelines which are not there at the moment. That has serious implications from an EU, but particularly from an Irish perspective. Also, it means that, and I'm just going on to the second page on this, because of that, licenses, UK licence holders will no longer be valid as of the withdrawal date in the EU. This is of particular concern. In other words, pilots with a UK licence will not have the same standing afterwards as they have beforehand. That could also mean a similar situation with Irish Aviation Authority issued pilots' licences to Irish pilots. Pilots' licences, pilot medical certificates and so on and so forth will no longer be valid. Another area, this got to the certificates for air operators and attestations of cabin crew. That's also affected. Engineers are affected. Certificates for aerodromes and so on are also affected. And there's a few more areas here. So it's got really deep repercussions for Irish airlines, employees in Ireland, and ultimately for passengers in Ireland. Very, very significant issue altogether. I can give you may have a copy of this, I'm sure you have it already. Part B of that, I'd just like your thoughts on that, or if the Department have really considered that, or helped the aviation industry in Ireland through maybe your discussions from an EU level on how we can transition this, because we've a lot more, let's call it UK licensed engineers and pilots and so on in Ireland per head of employment population in the industry than you do of, say, French or German or Spanish or Italians. It affects us a lot more, so it does. That could mean that you could have to have airplanes grounded because they don't have the proper licence to fly. It could mean that. Now, that's in a worst case scenario, but I don't know what's happening. I don't know what the situation is. I know of situations whereby American, like you're talking about third country status from an aviation perspective. That's what this document is talking about. So, for example, the US, we were in a position where a pilot, a commercial pilot with a US licence, could actually fly for up to 12 months in Ireland or in the EU before they have to go and do the exams to validate their European licence. Now, that has stopped. That stopped a number of years ago. That was being pulled back a number of years ago. If that's the same thing here for UK licence holders, it could cause a serious issue for the aviation industry. So part B of the question has got to do with the ownership, which you raised in your deliberation there earlier. If the majority, and my understanding is 51% of the shareholding of an airline is non-EU, that means it's not regarded as an EU airline. In that situation, if you look at Aer Lingus, obviously it's not Irish owned. It'll be outside the net. Ryanair may well be so. I don't know. It depends on the shareholding. It's a publicly quoted company. In actual fact, you don't have any. You only have one really small Irish airline. Pardon the pun on that. But you really don't have any Irish airlines. So you don't in the country, and therefore they're all outside of the EU. So that could become a particular issue of concern, and I'd really appreciate if that was maybe considered by you and your colleagues in the department, because it could be a very, very, very significant issue. So they're just my thoughts, Minister, and again, apologies I had to go earlier.
That's fine. I might answer one or two of those, and then I might ask Liam Coe to take the technical ones, because experts can speak to experts in that situation. You're not unfamiliar with the industry, I know. On the fuel duty rebates, it's not the same for Ireland and the UK for coaches. It's not an issue that's emerged in consultations between bus stakeholders, and my department and I will ask my officials to engage with those stakeholders on this. Is that all right? I think it's a fair question.
And if possible, Minister, I might help in those connections, if that's okay.
That would be useful.
All right, thank you.
I mean, that would be very useful. You were asking about the total trade. 21 billion, I think, is you're right. For the land bridge, exports are 18 and imports 3.
Oh, is it 21%?
Yeah. So that's kind of fairly. And maybe you could deal with the pilots and the issue there, Liam. Is that right?
If I may, come on, good. Maybe in reverse order, Senator, the ownership and control issue, as you quite accurately reflected, there is a significant issue in relation to the licensing of the main Irish carriers, Aer Lingus, Ryanair and indeed Stobart. The airlines are aware of this issue. The ownership and control issue has existed for airline licensing, Brexit or not, no Brexit. It is a feature of airline licensing, not just within the European market, but the world over. So airlines and their articles of association and their bread and butter is to keep their licence in conformity with the regulatory rules pertaining to the ownership and control rules. So it's nothing new. The airlines, obviously Brexit has a big impact on that, and they are making the necessary arrangements to be compliant from the 29th of March. Now, they have sought a time extension, and Ireland has pressed the case with the European Commission to have such a time flexibility built in, supported by other member states as well, to reflect the current circumstance where we are now, in the middle of February, and there is still no real clarity with regards to the status on the 29th of March. So to give sufficient time, the Commission has agreed to a new provision within the contingency regulation, the connectivity regulation, to allow grace periods subject to certain conditions. So it's a 7-month period, but it does bring some onerous conditions with it. They're not insurmountable. The airlines have welcomed it. It just gives a little bit of breathing space. But there is a commitment there on the part of the airlines to remain compliant with the rules. It's a highly regulated sector. The airlines concerned are highly compliant with all rules and regulations relating to their licensing conditions. So we'd be Reasonably confident. We've had a lot of consultations with the airlines concerned through the National Civil Aviation Development Forum. We've had consultations with the European Commission. We've had consultations with the National Competent Authority, which is the Commission for Aviation Regulation. We'll continue to do that until we're 100% sure that there's no risk here. But at the moment, we're reasonably assured that there won't be any disruption of services because of the ownership and control rule.
And in relation to pilots' licences and so on, which was very much a big part of the subject matter of this document that was issued.
Yeah.
Can you just give me an update on that, on the status of that?
Certainly. The second part of the contingency arrangements for air transport relates to aviation safety. So there is a contingency measure for that. For those entities within the UK that don't have it within their gift to move, to change their licensing, or their safety certificates and their approvals, there will be a derogation to allow those entities to apply to EASA in advance and for those certificates to be extended. For those aviation entities who can transfer, like pilots, for example, who can transfer their licences, it remains open to those pilots. There are plenty of mechanisms to transfer licences to any national authority across the EU 27, including the Irish Aviation Authority. In relation to the Irish Airlines, it's my understanding that the vast bulk of pilots operating Irish routes with the big two main carriers would be licensed through the Irish Aviation Authority already. So there might be a limited number of pilots holding CAA licences who would need to transfer to the IAA or to any other national authority in the EU 27 in good time.
I don't think there's an issue there, Liam, in relation to, let's say, the airline having a third country licence and pilots having an EU licence, and they working with the airline. I think the licence is standalone, I think. So possibly be okay. Thank you. I appreciate that, and you outlining the work and consideration you've put into this. Thanks.
I'd like to thank the Minister and his officials for their attendance here today, for the answering of the significant number of questions, and obviously to come back to us on the issues which still remain to be finalised. And the Joint Committee is now adjourned, until 2 p.m. on the 14th of February, when we will be inviting officials from the Department to brief us on the EU COM we discussed earlier, COM 2018-893. So thank you very much. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.